Well, hey Jonathan, welcome to Transcendent Philosophy. Such a pleasure to have you here today. But you
Uh,
have yourself listed as Winston. You want to explain that a little bit?
yeah, so I think the last time I was on StreamYard, I was almost exclusively going by my middle name at that time. And as we got closer, it's pretty much too late to change it, but it does have a story if we have time for a quick story.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
we got plenty of time. Yeah.
okay. Well, do we want to talk about how you and I met first, or should I start delving into my Jonathan Winston?
Yeah,
Uh,
we definitely need to introduce you to the group. I can give a little quick introduction. You can add to it as much as you want. But
okay.
yeah, so basically, I joined this Mormon group called Thoughtful Saints on Facebook. I debated Jacob Hansen, and somehow in that process, we were connected through that group. And I was always really impressed with your style of communication. You truly embody the kind of Christ like love and treating others as you would want to
Thank
be
you.
treated, and just complete model of Jesus Christ through your actions. And so I just thought that's pretty impressive, your character, and that you're someone that is, like someone that you can like make progress with and talking to. It's not just like, animosity, but it's actual like sincerity, and that's pretty awesome. So I really admire a lot of things about you and thought it'd be great to bring you on.
Yeah, I admire a lot of those same things about you, particularly when we are in the midst. We've had a lot of uh, semi rigorous debates just back and forth out of the comment sections, and I've been very impressed with the way that you can change gears and throw out a sincere compliment just right in the middle of a debate and say, "Oh, that's a good point there," things like that. So I appreciate that as well, and I'm actually a little bit I don't know, surprised a little bit with the way you described me, because there have been times online. There was one day in particular, and I took a social media break after this, but there was one time in particular where I was called an asshole about 18 times in one day, and
Wow.
and but about 8 of those were from the same person. But as we went back and forth, but I'm not always nice, but I try to
Yeah,
be
yeah.
kind.
Well, and like you must have not eaten properly or something. You got your biochemicals out of whack. It happens to everyone.
Right, right, right.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I appreciate that. So, but yeah, I can go as far as like my Winston Jonathan story. So, when I was about 25, I moved to Sandy, Utah. I'd grown up almost my entire life besides the mission and one other stint in Arizona in the basically the sheltered place of Highland, Utah. And and then I was going to a singles ward there, but then a friend invited me to Sandy, so I went to the other side of the mountain, as it were, and just to room with him, and that's where I ended up meeting my wife. But when I went to Sandy, I'd gone by my first name my entire life, and so I don't know if anyone's ever read the Color Code personality
Oh
book,
yeah, totally. My
but
family loves that book.
yeah. So I read it for the first time, think in my young 20s, and I I found out that I was a blue white. Blue was the highest, and
Oh.
white next. And so I went to Sandy with the express intent. I'm like, nobody knows me here. I could just be somebody completely different, and they wouldn't know any better. So I was trying my best to be a red yellow, and I'm like, they
Wow.
also don't know my name. So I'm going to go
Wow.
by my middle name, and this will
Uh-huh,
be like the
uh-huh.
Winston persona instead of the Jonathan
Wow.
persona. And so my wife and her family actually met me, or they were introduced to me by my middle name. And
Mm.
once we actually started dating, then I told her, everyone else, like my family and everyone else, knows me as Jonathan. But it's kind of like, even right now,
Mhm.
my church directory has me as Winston, and my whole ward calls me Winston. But then in business, when I'm doing my truck driving and other things, then it's been Jonathan. And so, yeah, there you go. All that.
That's such a fascinating story. Like just off the bat, you're blowing my mind with like what a cool personality you have. Like such an interesting social experiment in psychology, trying to reinvent yourself and playing with personal development like that. That's pretty cool.
It was
I
kind of unfair, like, that she kind of got introduced to, well, I don't know if all's fair in love and war, right? But she
Yeah, exactly.
introduced to this person that was like trying to be like, oh, I'm fun and I'm direct, and that's not really usually me. And then it's like, oh, this is actually my normal me, is when I'm over
Right.
critical and
Yeah.
just blah blah blah. But yeah, anyways,
No,
I kind of
I mean, like I'm not a psychologist or anything, but I think that like trying to get a little bit more of a balance, there's a lot of logic to if you're a little bit over too extreme in one area, like trying to practice the opposite trait is a good way to build a little bit of balance, which is probably healthy.
right.
So just maybe to contrast, just to make sure, I don't know, I don't introduce myself very much on my own channel, but maybe people don't know that much about me either, so it might be good to just say I come from Arizona. I grew up as a Latter-day Saint, a very Orthodox Mormon family. My dad and mom were both returned missionaries, so they both took it. My dad was a convert, so he didn't. It wasn't like the family obligation to continue the religion. Like he really believed it. That's why he joined. So like pretty passionate Mormon family. And like I grew up within that structure, and my mom, when I was like very young, my mom said, Seth has an old soul, right? And so I guess I was just a deep thinker, and like from a very young age, it was obvious that I was like, that style. And so I became a very passionate, very strong believing Mormon. I had lots of spiritual experiences growing up, and so I took it super seriously. Like I was like 100% confident that everything was true from the age of 9. Like believing that everything is 100, like having that much confidence at such a young age, it like makes the trajectory of your life kind of insane. And the trajectory of my life was pretty insane after that. But that's probably too much detail. The main point is I had a bunch of bad luck in my 20s, and it started like having a lot of contradictions, a lot of cognitive dissonance. It's like, if all of this stuff is real, then this is how reality should look. But I'm having all these contradictions. Reality doesn't look the way I thought it was supposed to look. And so it just kept growing my questions until I had a faith crisis at 25 and became agnostic. And then 6 years later, can call myself an atheist. So that's a pretty big transition. But I love interacting with Mormons and dissecting these philosophic issues because I feel like I kind of understand both sides a little bit. So navigating that in-between space is probably pretty valuable.
By the way, that's the first time, I hate to admit this, because I hopped on after your video started the other day when I was watching your last live. And so that was the first time that I saw your dragon kind of
Introduction?
the two dragons kind of melding together. Kind of like the dialectic, I guess, is what that represents. But yeah, but I was that was pretty cool. I like that.
Thank you. I animated that myself. It took me like 2 weeks to learn some principles of animation and then 2 weeks to actually build it. So that's a self-creation. I'm kind of minorly
Have you done any since
that.
then?
No, it's way too much effort, way too, like 80 hours of work. I'm like, screw it. So,
well, if it makes you feel any better, my 10-year-old nephew does it animating all the time, or so if that makes you feel any better. No, I don't know anything about it, but he's homeschooled, and my brother has him learning that, so it's kind of cool.
That's awesome, man. I imagine you get more efficient over time, but when you're a beginner, it's just really hard.
Right.
So we have an interesting topic today. The title of this is Are Mormons Too Nice? Ooh, provocative. The philosophy of kindness. What do you think of that?
Well, when you first introduced that would be what we were talking about, then I can tell you that it had me like just thinking about that question. It was hard to fall asleep. I was just like, oh, there's so much there. It's such a simple question, but there's still so much there.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think that's probably the first thing. There's like I really love to talk about like the Aristotelian perspective on virtue, right? So it took me, I think I had to leave Mormonism before I, actually learned about Aristotelian ethics. But I started like as I was slowly like in my 20s, I was starting to like slowly lose my faith. During that process, I started questioning like Mormon perspective of virtues. At least my experience with the Mormon perspective of virtues. And the way I would describe it is it was very bipolar. And, like maybe there's Mormons that are more nuanced, and you're probably way more nuanced than I was as a 20-year-old. But like I felt like kind of the Mormon thing was, like niceness is a virtue and not being nice is a vice, and it's bipolar. It's like, and so it's like one thing is good, the opposite is bad, and we need to maximize the good thing. So we need to maximize our niceness. And then there's like gratitude and ingratitude. That's the vice and virtue. And so it's bipolar. So we need to minimize the ingratitude, maximize the gratitude, right? And after I learned the Aristotelian perspective, I started to realize, wow, this is actually problematic because your virtues can go too far. Or at least that's the Aristotelian perspective. Too much gratitude is a bad thing. You can't just maximize it infinitely. And too much niceness is a bad thing. At least that's what me and Aristotle would argue. So I view the Aristotelian. Yeah. We'll see what you think, but I view this as it's a tripolar paradigm where there's two vices instead of one vice. There's too much niceness is a vice, too little niceness is a vice, and then the virtue is this in the middle, right?
Right.
What do you think about that?
Well, so I agree with you as far as I don't know. I don't really remember directly the exact teachings I got when I was a kid. Like, I can't remember the words, but I do remember that what you're saying exactly is what impressed itself upon me. I do remember there's these little cards that my sisters would hang on their wall, these Mormon ads that would like come in the inside, you'd tear them out, and they had these like little pictures and messages. And I remember one of them now, I don't really like it. now that I have a little bit more nuanced perspective on this topic, because it says, it's nice to be important, but it's more important to be nice. And the reason why I have come to think about it a little bit differently is when I was young, like exactly what you're talking about was impressed upon me, that like the niceness to the extreme was good and you deserved praise if you were a nice person. And if you were, if you spoke your mind or something, then you deserved to be chastised, or if you complained, then you're murmuring, things like that. But when I was a teenager, I became kind of a niceness Pharisee because my little brother, a couple years younger than me, he was very just, I swear, like just the way he was born, and just he's been that way his entire life, and he still is, although he's more nuanced as well. But he's always just been extremely direct and say his mind, sometimes with an ounce of sarcasm, and he would say it to adults that were getting on his nerves, to kids, like whoever, he would just speak his mind. And so I was always policing him and saying, hey, you need to be more nice. And basically I thought it was my job as the older brother, because I was 2 years older than him, to make sure that he went to heaven. So I had to like police him. And so I actually read Jesus the Christ when I was on my mission by Talmage. And when I read that, and I actually learned about learned about Christ in a more nuanced way, deep diving into all of the things that he did, I realized, he's not always nice. And so I actually wrote my brother an apology letter while I was on my mission, and said, I actually used this phrase, said this almost word for word, that you're closer to the character of our master than I am. And so I just swallow that pill. I'm like, I've been chastising you my entire life, and I'm actually a little bit of a coward because I won't say what I think, whereas you'll say what you think and you'll stand for what you believe is just. And so, anyways, that's that story. But yeah, I agree with what you're saying.
What a powerful story. That's just a powerful story of self-transformation, of realization of your own limits, realization of the yin yang, the goodness and the opposites, right? It's like sometimes, like, one perspective of niceness, there's an element of truth to it, but there's also another truth to the other side. And that's really cool how you figured out how to transcend that more naive perspective and embrace a more complex, more nuanced perspective.
Right. And I would even call it a reverse hypocrisy. Reverse hypocrisy, meaning that the hypocrisy that's traditionally talked about in the scriptures is like where, you're doing something, and so, but yet you're still going to point out when other people are doing something that's the same scale or maybe even a much smaller scale of the things that you're doing. You're swallowing a camel, but you're, going to strain at a gnat or whatever. But the reverse hypocrisy, or like, is why I'm saying it that way is that you're basically not willing to, you're wanting, it's still kind of the same motivation. You're wanting to look good according to the way the culture will view you, because you want them to view you as a Christ-like nice person. So you're actually not pointing out when you disagree. You're being too agreeable. Whereas like the other hypocrisy is like you're just pointing everything out and causing a bunch of contention. But this could be like where you're just being too agreeable because, and I don't know if I'm getting ahead here in what we're talking about, but I was thinking that's like problematic in its own right. So
are you alluding to the problem of being superficial?
Well, so if you truly care about somebody, if you have that kindred spirit, which is actually, I think, what led to this topic, is I really loved when we were talking on Facebook where you said you prefer the word kind because of how it's rooted in kindred. So if you have a kindred spirit, the things that you believe to be true, the things that you value, you would want to share that with others, or at least you'd want it. Like if I'm truly your friend and I believe that Mormonism is true or Christianity is true or whatever, I would want to share that with you. And if you're my friend and you believe that atheism is true and that it helps people like be more based or whatever, you would want to try to like, we wouldn't want to just sit on the couch. We wouldn't want to just sit on the couch for each other and just nod our heads politely the whole time, because I feel like if you have a kindred spirit, you're actually going to speak your mind and invite, so yeah. So I think I'm now lost the question, but I agreed. I think that is what it is.
Yeah. I guess the idea of reverse hypocrisy hasn't fully clicked in my mind yet. So,
well, it's still I guess it's still hypocrisy, because you're still just wanting the praise of others to say, oh, he's so Christ-like or whatever, he's so nice, and so it makes you cowardly. So you're still not being genuine, you're still kind of lying to yourself like a hypocrite would do, but you're doing it, you're doing kind of the opposite actions as the traditional hypocrisy. You're not pointing out things that you disagree with. You're being ultra agreeable, so you can be just like, oh yeah.
Okay. So like a traditional hypocrite, a Pharisee would be like, they'd be critical and disagreeable, but it's a facade, it's superficial, it's self-contradictory, it's insincere. They're playing a social game with their disagreeableness. And you're saying the same thing, except instead of disagreeable, it's agreeable. You're still playing a superficial game. It's still a facade. You're just trying to look good, but you're looking good with the method of agreeableness instead of disagreeableness.
Right. And I can't prove this, but I bet you that a lot of people like that go online in anonymously and are all of a sudden really rude.
Anonymous
like
social
they're
media presence. That's an interesting question.
they're thinking all these things about people, like, oh, this person's going to hell, he's terrible, but then they see him in person and they're like, oh, you're the greatest person ever. So I don't
You
know.
have so much potential. Yeah, yeah.
Everyone's trying their best.
So you've already brought up a really important point, which is this agreeableness, disagreeableness dichotomy. Do you want to flesh that out so that everyone's on the same page?
So I'll try to. So agreeableness versus disagreeableness. So I think we were comparing that to the word nice when we had talked about it earlier. So it's not like I said, it's not necessarily unkind to be disagreeable in certain things. If you're really passionate about something and you think that it's the better way to think that it's the better way to think. That's the way to say it. So if you think a certain way is a better way to think, and you have a kindred spirit with the person you're talking to, you're going to try to help him see that way of thinking, and even being disagreeable while you do that, which could be thought of as not nice at times. And so agreeableness, I think, is pretty synonymous with niceness, where disagreeableness would be pretty synonymous with maybe rudeness, or I don't know, opposite of niceness.
Yeah. I think one of the simplest way to think of it is disagreeable people, they have no hesitation in saying no. They can reject you very easily. Agreeable people have a difficult time saying no, and they're much more likely to cave and just say yes and agree with people, right?
Yeah, but that's my that's like I said, my little brother.
Yeah.
Maybe the reason why I criticized him is because secretly I wanted to be him. Like, wow, that's pretty brave. What you did.
Yeah. My dad is of my parents. My mom is super agreeable. My dad is super disagreeable. So that's always been very stark. Yeah. Dad says no. Go ask mom if we can have candy. She'll say yes. You know what I mean? A classic children plotting to find the agreeable parent, right?
I think that's the same with my parents, dad and mom, the same as your parents.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there's a lot of pros and cons that we could discuss for niceness, and then we could contrast it with kindness.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a list of pros and cons. Do you want me to just read them off and see what you think of them, or
yeah,
or should we go slowly one by one?
Read them off. Let's pull the Band-Aid off.
Okay, so the pros. Well, I think there's kind of like, so I look at everything from an evolutionary lens. So I think that when things are nice, so like if something is nice, it's being agreeable with you, it's saying yes to you, it's being willing to help you, and it's cooperating with you, it's being pleasant with you.
Helping you survive.
Exactly. So if you find someone that's agreeable, that's basically like an ally. It's like they'll do whatever I say, like that's useful to me. And so niceness, it creates an evolutionary incentive for protection, right? So if I'm disagreeable and I find someone who's agreeable, it's like, hey, I want to protect them because they're going to help me out in the future. So there's kind of there's an interesting symbiosis there, where sometimes the nice people, they don't stick up for themselves enough, and so they need a disagreeable partner. The disagreeable partner will defend them and protect them. And so there's kind of this symbiosis where they help the disagreeable one can protect them. There's kind of that teamwork. So that's kind of a cool thing about niceness. Do you want to jump in on that?
So to be honest, it went over my head a little bit. So like the first thing that I thought of was like, were you describing a codependent thing or an interdependent thing? And so I couldn't decide which one it was. It hasn't fully sunk in yet, so we can move on, or you can clarify, because I didn't quite fully get it, I guess.
Yeah, I guess I think there's an instinct to protect for like little children, right? Little children, they're agreeable, they'll obey their parents, they're they can I guess this is a hypothetical scenario, but like there's an instinct to protect children, there's an instinct to protect women. I think children and women sometimes are slightly on the more agreeable side of the spectrum.
Uh-huh.
Men are slightly, and obviously there's, it goes both ways, but that's kind of one way to think of it evolutionarily. The man, he needs the women and the children, and they need the man, and there's kind of that symbiosis going on,
Oh,
right?
okay.
Yeah, so that's one way to think of it. Um, so yeah, I think that the Aristotelian perspective is you just, in order to make niceness work as a virtue, you just have to make sure you're balancing it, right? So you can't be too nice, and so that's one thing we're going to discuss more. There's a game theory perspective on niceness, which is, oh, I basically alluded to it already, is the symbiosis versus parasitism, right? Parasites. So parasites, they are looking for a short-term benefit. Symbiosis is looking for long-term cooperation, right? The long-term benefit.
Right.
So a parasite would want to take advantage of a nice person. It's like, oh, so like a narcissist, they'd be like, oh, here's a nice person, I can walk all over them, right?
Right. Like the mother
That would,
Entangled was a good example of that type of relationship, right? I don't know if you remember that with
yeah,
Rapunzel, where she's like brushing her hair and it's
right,
keeping her young or whatever.
right. So that's actually the con of being too nice is that you can get taken advantage of
Right.
by parasites. But
Manipulated.
but the benefit of niceness is when you can create the symbiotic cooperative relationship. And in game theory, there's kind of a complex perspective on niceness. There's this complex idea of tit for tat. And so tit for tat is a strategy, and there's different varieties of tit for tat. And so, like, just at face value, tit for tat, it's basically a concept of revenge. So if you if you if you tap me, I tap you back. If you hit me,
Right.
I hit you back, right? If you
Right.
steal from me, I steal from you. And so by creating this revenge relationship, it disincentivizes, parasitic behavior. It disincentivizes crime, it disincentivizes abuse, right? But there's a certain amount of disagreeableness built into revenge, right? So part of the tit for tat strategy is you have to be willing to stick up for yourself, right? Now, but the tit for tat strategy, the nice part is the beginning of it. So in tit for tat, you start out nice, which is the initial strategy is I do good to you, and then I observe. So
Okay.
you start out nice. I'm good to you. Then I watch you. If you're good to me, then we create symbiosis. I'm good to
Right.
you. You're good to me. I'm good to you. You're good to me. We spiral upwards in friendship. But if I'm good to you, I watch you. You're bad to me. Uh-oh, revenge cycle. Now I punish you for that, right? And so it starts with niceness, and then it converts to mean conditionally. And then, so it's like you're mean to me, I'm mean to you back. And then I observe, like after the revenge, if you're nice to me, then I go back to being nice, right? And
Right.
so there's forgiveness built into the tit for tat. So the tit for tat, you start nice, you return with meanness if necessary, and then you forgive, right? And so that's kind of a complex strategy that they do software simulations, and they find that this type of a strategy is very successful in evolutionary game theory.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is a really off-topic tangent, but for
Mhm.
some reason, I don't know why. While you're explaining evolutionary game theory, I thought of like the Charlie the Unicorn cartoon. But
Oh, really?
I was listening to
I
that as, but I don't know if you've seen it. But
no.
there's these. I can't even remember what type of creatures they were. Maybe they were unicorns too. But they're talking to this unicorn named Charlie, and they're like, annoyingly nice at the beginning of it. They're just like,
Mhm.
"Hey, Charlie, it's good to see you, Charlie. Come with us to Candy Mountain, Charlie." And then,
Mhm.
by the end of it, he's kind of grumpy, kind of Eeyore like, and by the end of it, he's like, okay, let's go to Candy Mountain, and then somehow he ends up on a surgery table with his spleen missing, but like,
Oh no. Oh no.
so they were like, it wasn't really tit. So I guess I can explain why. So with your tit for tat, it was making me think of, I don't know if this is what it is, but like, is it kind of like in some ways you have, maybe this is, I'm reading too far into it, but I was just wondering if, like, with the tit for tat you're talking about, has goodwill, is goodwill a part of that, or is that maybe doesn't have anything to do with it? But I was thinking, like, if you're playing a joke on someone and it's more of a lighthearted thing, like you're not trying to deceive them to steal their spleen or whatever, but you're just, playing a harmless prank, or, sometimes, like, like you said at the beginning, an excessive amount of niceness could be very, very boring. And so if with what you're talking about, I guess it's maybe as genuine revenge in this situation, but like, if you're looking at the story of life, like stories like that, revenge stories like Count of Monte Cristo, and I love the TV show The Mentalist. They actually add a lot of spice to life, like that. Somebody's trying to get revenge. So and on a smaller scale, little like pranks. You're not being very nice when you're pulling a prank, but it brings joy. Like, you tell the story later and it brings joy. People laugh. Like when my father-in-law first, because he knew I was a returned missionary, the first time he said shit in front of me, he's like, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't recognize who I was with. I'm so sorry that I said that. And I said, shit, that's not a problem. I'm like, just don't say that. Just don't say the C word. He's like, the C word. And I'm like, oh, I mean, CRAP. Don't do that. and then like, for the next year, whenever anyone would say crap in front of me, then he would tell him, oh, don't say that in front of Winston. He doesn't like that word. And I just didn't clarify with him for like a year because it was funny.
Oh, wow.
Maybe that wasn't very nice, but it was funny. So I don't know. That's probably takes you completely off track with where you're going, but
Yeah. That's like, that's, game theory doesn't really incorporate that granular level of detail. That human social activity is really complex. There's lots of little nuances. Like humor is kind of an evolutionary mystery. Like, why do we like humor? So, like, that's a complex example. I don't have a ton of thoughts on that one, except like there's probably a certain amount of like pranks. It's like, was it in psychology? There's a thing called, what is that word? It's like like facing your fears. What is that? There's a technical term I'm forgetting. But there's like something psychologically healthy about like confronting your fears. And so, like, I don't know, sometimes pranks, it's like, hiding behind a door and scaring someone, and like getting people used to processing their fears is, I don't know, maybe that's, there could be all of these little tiny little benefits that to our stupid activities that we don't even know about. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, this is scary. You've done enough of these, but you probably always have like a little bit of nervousness each time. But I haven't done as many as you. So this is actually like what did kind of get me those feels, the scary feels doing this. But in general, I actually am kind of an abnormality. Like things happen that I should jump at and I don't. Like I even had a car hit me in the side of my car before, and at the time I remember like just thinking, okay, this is it. Like it was like this weird calmness, and it was, I barely like didn't get hurt really bad from that one, but go ahead.
Were you thinking you were going to die? Was it calmness in the face of death?
I don't even know. It's weird. It's like I just don't startle very easily. Like it's really weird. So I actually set bets with like kids that I meet sometime, like young kids. I say, hey, if you can startle me and really make me jump, I'll take Chaz and I will take you out to lunch or something, and then they have fun trying to, and like this is about the most of the time what they get out of me is just kind of but
That's funny.
but yeah. So for some reason, startling. I don't know what it is, but I don't startle easily. But yeah, doing something like this is actually a big thing for me
More
to grow as a person.
slightly more anxiety provoking.
Yes.
Well, you're doing great so far. So no one would have known if you didn't say.
Yeah, I shouldn't have said.
So I think there's something interesting about Mormons. They have like this reputation as being like really nice. And you know, there's one thing that I've noticed. Like I think it's probably true. Like the stereotype of Mormon niceness. Like something about Mormon culture makes them nicer than average. And I don't even know what that is. So I'd be curious if you have any ideas. But here's like an
It's the
interesting
Jello.
example. The Jello, the Jello. Um, like you know, the online environment is super toxic. Often, Twitter is like probably the most toxic environment. I usually stay away from Twitter, but Facebook, yeah, it's better, but it can get toxic. But I've noticed I really enjoy Mormon groups on Facebook. Well, I'm you know I'm ex-Mormon atheist, but there's a abnormally lower level of toxicity, I think, which is pretty awesome. So there's something that Mormons are doing right that's worthy to think about, worthy to ponder, and maybe emulate. You know what I mean?
Well, somebody that I have a friend named Esteban. He's more than a friend. He's one of those friends that the few that you get in life that you actually just start referring to people when you're in public as this is my brother or this is my cousin because you're past the point of just friends. You're just you're going to be friends for life. He's basically one of the family, and he's agnostic, and he moved to Utah for a job. His best friend at the time was LDS, and so he was going to, I think he was going to school here or something, and then he went to BYU Hawaii. But he invited him to work at Xerox, and anyways, I met Esteban in the house in Sandy that I moved into when I met my wife, and that's something that he had mentioned that something about, like, he's like in Washington State where I'm from, people don't even know their neighbor's name or know who their neighbor, like who they don't it's not normal to like even like approach your neighbor and be like, hey, let me get to know who you are and what you guys do, and this is my name. And that's probably varies from state to state, definitely varies from country to country, because like when I went to Jamaica, then that was like a whole, almost a video game world compared to like what I was used to here. But he said like what he liked about Utah is that people did know who their neighbors were, and like they might even bring them a plate of cookies, but they know kind of who they are, and so that's kind of was unique to him. But
yeah, that is kind of cool. Yeah, growing up, I grew up in Mesa, Arizona, which there's a ton of Mormons. My neighborhood was 50% Mormon. So I knew all of my Mormon neighbors, but I didn't know any of my non-Mormon neighbors. So take that for whatever that's worth.
yeah.
So now we can think about the cons. So this is the question: are Mormons too nice, right? So there's a certain amount of niceness that is awesome and valuable, but if you're on the extreme side of the spectrum, there's a possibility of going too far, right? And so it's worth thinking about where the line is so you can maximize the value of what you're doing. So we've kind of talked about this before. One of the problems is if you're too agreeable, you can't say no. And being unable to say no is a huge problem when the situation demands a no, right? So if boundaries are being violated, if you are being disrespected, if there's a moral situation, it's like if Hitler's Nazis are coming around, they say, hey, it's time for you to join our ranks and go persecute the Jews. If you don't know how to say no, you're just gonna follow along, right? And so sometimes morality demands a no. And like you said, your brother, he he could stick up for his own principles, which is why you started to admire that aspect of him.
I
So
think
if
it would be useful to separate two kinds of niceness too, because I actually asked a couple of people today what they thought of the question about Mormons, and I got a really good answer from a Gen Zer, where I asked him, "What do you think?" And he's like, "Well, me and my brother are definitely not too nice. Like we say, we say what's on our mind. Like we're direct, which I think is the way it should be." And so he actually brought up three different ways. Being direct is, I guess, was an opposite of niceness in a way for him, and he believed that like being direct was actually preferable to being nice. But then he also said, however, and then he started thinking about somebody else that he knew that just was always saying yes to every single person that ever asked her for money. And so he was like, I think this person I'm thinking of needs to learn how to say no, like you're saying, like not always give people money when they're asking for money, because then they keep asking for money. I guess there's that money is one aspect, but it could be a lot of things they're asking of you. They could be asking for your soul, but other than that, but then he brought up a third type of niceness, where he said, I don't think that there's such a thing as having too much manners. And so like I was at I do roll off dumpsters for my job, and I was at the dump today, and I don't think I normally have manners like this. I'm usually in my own world. So I probably am normally driving and dumping my load and sending a huge cloud of dust to everyone. But today I actually thought to say to the person in the lane next to me at the landfill, hey, you might want to get into your truck. When I've tipped my dumpster up, I'm going to drive forward really fast. There's probably going to be dust. And he said, oh no, I'm good. But he's like, thanks. That was really nice. And I thought, I'm going to be on a podcast tonight about niceness. But that was an example of like, hey, that could also apply to when you're on the road driving, the way that you, use your blinker. I don't know. Do you take the time to try to not be a nuisance on the road? That would be an example of manners. So I there's something to what my Gen Zer that I asked, where he said, I don't think there's such thing as too much manners.
Yeah, that's a fascinating question, right? The Aristotelian perspective in me is resisting this conclusion. There's gotta be such thing as too much manners, but largely, it kind of seems like, yeah. I mean, the only thing that comes to mind at the moment is just like the cost in terms of time, the inefficiency of manners. You have to elongate your sentences. Pardon me. There's certain mannerisms. You have to slow down in order to bring out the manners. And so if you're in a
Voldemort
rush,
saying to Harry, we must observe the niceties, Harry, right?
yeah.
You got to observe the niceties.
Right. And like people often say, people in New York are more rude. If you're living a high stress, fast paced lifestyle, there's thousands of people. You don't have time to greet every single one of them. You know what I mean?
Right.
Well, I have a weird story about my dog. We might be talking about dogs later, so this will be funny. We had a dog that was like the smartest dog I've ever met, and her name was Sheba. And Sheba, she was excessively polite in this way. She had too many manners, right? Like we'd have 10 people hanging out in the living room, sitting on the couches, and she would enter the room and she would go up to each person and she would kind of like bow before them and kind of like whimper, and kind of like her body language was, do I have your permission to be here? And then the person would pet her and she'd perk up and she'd be like, yay, I got permission. Then she'd go to the next person. She'd be very submissive, bow her head and whimper a little bit. And she would basically ask every single one in the room, do I have your permission to be here? She'd get a little pat and then she would be herself after she got approval from everyone. but it was a little bit of a ritual that took her time. She had to invest time in that, whatever that was. You know what I mean?
It's almost like when you're reading a Jane Austen novel or something, where the niceties can become almost excessive at that point. Every time you have a social interaction, how are you? How is the family? How is the dog? How is your business?
Yes. Right. Right. And someone with less manners would be like, cut the crap. I don't really care. Let's solve the problem.
Jane Austen is one of my heroes, though, so I don't know. Maybe
Yeah.
maybe it's charming to me.
Mm. So that's a really good point, though. That's worth thinking more about. One of the problems with niceness is sometimes it can be superficial, it can be insincere, it can be pretentious, it can be inauthentic, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a concept called like love bombing. Have you heard of that?
I've heard of it. Haven't
Mm-hmm.
thought of it that much, but I've heard of it.
Yeah, love bombing is kind of this idea that when you're trying to when you're trying to convert someone into joining your group, it's like when someone's investigating, it's like we're going to like surround them and compliment them. Oh, you're learning so much. Oh, you're growing as a person. Oh, this is so cool that you're going to become a part of us. It's like there's like certain element of like everyone like they fly in and like drop all these compliments as like they're like bombing this person. It's like an air raid bombing them with positivity. And
Yeah.
some people like get sucked into the group because like, wow, I'm not used to being like surrounded by so much niceness, right? But there's a certain element of like once they join the group, then it's like, where did the niceness go? It was kind of a strategy to lure you in, and like after you're in, it kind of fades away a little bit. You know what I mean?
Right, right. You're more interesting as the I guess in a Mormon context, maybe you're more interesting as the one sheep. But now that you're the 90 and 9, you're like, oh, you're just one of the 99.
Right, right.
So
So yeah, sometimes it can seem superficial, but maybe it's sincere. And maybe, what do you think about that?
so I think you've actually hit on something that because when you first introduced the topic of are Mormons too nice, where my
Mm-hmm.
mind went, and I actually created a list of 50 things that we could
Oh
go on
wow.
do later. It's I don't necessarily think it's where the conversation's going, but I did like I'm like, wait, Mormon, what do you mean by Mormon? Do you mean Arizonian Mormon? Do you mean Utah County Mormon? Do you mean like southern central Utah Mormons, which is in the country? Do you mean and or do you mean like the Brighamites? Do you mean there's all these variations of Mormon, and it's not even necessarily part of the LDS Church. There's like and so I was like, oh, Mormon, that's very vague. I like that, and I created like a list of like 50. But if we're talking specifically more, which is I feel like where this conversation is going, more of just like members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the cultures that surround like ward houses and things like that. I feel like that's where we've settled upon most of this conversation. I feel like you've hit on with that one where somebody can something that we can improve on large like in a huge way with culture, because somebody can like they can in general be love bombing a person, like when they're with them, you're like showering them with compliments, doing all this stuff, but at the same time thinking, oh, the reason I'm love bombing them or like it's because they're not I've actually am living a higher type of life than they are, and so like secretly I'm like not as much on the surface I'm thinking, oh, this person is in danger of hell, and I'm scared for them, and you're kind of in some ways acting out of fear. You're like, oh, I've got to rescue this person, and so then it is kind of bipolar in a way, because uh, people can get overwhelmed by the you know, they know that they're being prayed for. They're, you know, it's like a, you know, you're basically in some ways you're not acting genuinely with that person, because you could just come out and say it, like we were talking about. Kindness would say, hey, I want to introduce you to my way of thinking, but then you just kind of, this is my way of thinking, take it or leave it. Like, I'm still gonna, you know, it's all good, but this is, let me try to help you understand my way of thinking. Whereas instead of doing that, you're just, oh, you're so awesome, you're so wonderful, except that you're going to hell, but you're wonderful. So, you know, that's something that I think you did hit on something there, I guess, is what, after all my ramblings, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's an easy area of improvement, is to try to be a little bit more sincere, or to watch out for the insincere aspect of niceness, you know?
And I
Like,
don't think it's actually insincere.
uh-huh.
Like, I think it's just smothering.
Yeah, yeah. I like, and maybe like, and every instance is different. Maybe some situations are more sincere than others, but like, I think that like my experience with Mormonism, like, I grew up, I don't know how Mormonism did this to me, but ever since I was like 5 years old, I was like obsessed with the concept of niceness. Like, I remember every single day I would pray and ask God to help me be nice. So like, somehow the importance of niceness got ingrained in me from a young age. Like, that was the top of, you know, in a hierarchy of virtues, that was the top. I was always focused on that. And like, if you're naturally disagreeable, it's probably good to focus on niceness. But if you're naturally nice, you probably need to focus on the opposite.
On being disagreeable.
And I probably lean towards disagreeable in my nature, so it's good for me to focus on niceness. But you know, I started to see some of the insincerity of it as I got older. I started to see through it a little bit. Like in young single adults, I made hundreds of friends in the young single adults, but I started to see that these friendships were kind of superficial. And I don't know if it was my fault. Maybe I was superficial, but like, it really was obvious to me how superficial my friendships were when I needed help moving. I was struggling with a divorce, and I was calling up my young single adult friends to see if they could help me move some furniture. And it was really hard getting help. I was like, wow, like I thought our friendship was a little bit deeper than this, you know what I mean? And so that was kind of eye-opening. And the weird thing was, like, after leaving Mormonism, like, my pool of friends drastically decreased. It was like I was, you know, leaving. There's a certain amount of leaving a religion is really hard for a couple years. It's like, I don't feel like I can talk to Mormons anymore because they don't understand what I'm going through. And it's just going to make me more upset, not less upset. And so I just need a little bit of space from Mormonism while I try to, you know, process these emotions. And so, like, my pool of friends just went to zero overnight. I'm like, wow, I have like no support during the hardest time of my life. That kind of sucks. But like, I started building some more friends, you know, in a non-Mormon context. And I found that for some reason, these new friendships were way deeper than any of my friendships before. Like, it was like, I went from hundreds of friends to like 3 friends, but those 3 friends were like infinitely deeper. So I was like, wow, that's such an interesting contrast there. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it immediately brings to mind J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. I don't know how accurate are the things that I've read about their friendship, but from what I understand, C.S. Lewis was a little bit more extroverted and J.R.R. Tolkien was a little more introverted, and he valued friendship, one-on-one friendship, maybe at a higher level than C.S. Lewis, where C.S. Lewis was more like, hey, let's bring everyone in, and, you know, let me like everyone know me, and me be kind of a thing to all these people. But you know, I guess their friendship suffered over the years because J.R.R. Tolkien started to feel like is this guy even really my friend? Like, so it made me, that was a really fascinating story for me to read when I was reading that, just showing how different personalities. But I think there's something also to when you are asked, by your church callings, by the Lord Himself, by like, when you're like, you read this thing where it says, how great shall be your joy with Him in the kingdom of my Father if I bring somebody in, and then if your joy shall be great with one soul, even more, how more great will your joy be if you bring many souls unto me. And so there probably is this tendency, if we're just, really like, engrossed and enveloped in Scripture as a Mormon, to like maybe extend ourselves more than we're able to some extent. And so
That's
it would be harder to be a good friend, maybe.
That's a fascinating point. I love that. I think that's probably true. There's probably a bias, a quantity over quality bias,
Mm-hmm.
which might be part of it. So that's fascinating. Yeah.
Right.
I think there's another part of it too, which is, there's a common atheist quip, which I don't know, might be a little bit offensive or provocative, but I think it gets to an interesting problem that might be connected. So there's this idea that if you need the idea of a God in order for you to do good things, then like that's not true goodness, right? So like the idea is true goodness is wanting to do good things because you're a good person. And like if you need the fear of God, or if you need the commandments of God to go tell you to do good things, then there's a certain element of your good actions are not sincere. Like you're doing the good thing because God told you to. You're not doing the good thing because you want to. You know what I mean? Now the Mormon perspective, they're saying, well, we're supposed to change our desires to be in alignment with God, so we're trying to progress, right? But to the extent that there's a gap, right, then there's a problem. There's an insincerity problem, right? The goal would be to want to do the thing and not just do it because you have to, right? And so like doing good moral things versus like the whole idea of home teaching, right? Are you connecting with these people as a home teacher because you want to or because you have to? You know what I mean?
So what you're really saying is that Batman was wrong then.
Oh, expand on that.
I don't know. I don't know if I can do a Batman impression, but it's not who you are in the inside that counts, but what you do that defines you. No, that's from Batman Begins, I believe.
Yeah.
But you're saying that it is what you are on the inside that counts.
Well, if the goal is sincerity, then the inside is what
Oh,
counts.
okay.
Right?
I
Right?
agree. I just thought of that Batman.
It's
But
the value of sincerity could be debated, but that's kind of
well, the thing that really kept running through my mind the last couple of days, as you first introduced this topic to me, is just how incredibly hard life is for every single person. And I think that it's good for believers to hear that from atheists, just because it causes. I think anytime something said causes you to think, it's a good thing. That's, I guess, we were thinking of maybe even bringing up a little bit more about philosophy towards the end here, I think. But I guess philosophy, the meaning of it is love of wisdom. So like you love to think, you love to grow. But I think life is really, really hard. Like if you, for all of us, whether you're a believer or non-believer in the supernatural and the magical worldview, I think life itself kind of kicks our butt and changes us on the inside if we just don't give up and continue to build relationships. So I think that what I would say to that is both believers and non-believers, if they're living life and not giving up, are going to grow as a person, and they're going to grow into more mature forms of love, as long as they're not giving up on relationships and continuing to like try to build them. It's just life just kicks our butt, and it's painful, and that pain does help us grow into something that we weren't at the beginning. If we were sincere, maybe we'll be more sincere because we'll know what the pain, like empathy, kind of comes more over time.
yeah. So I had, so I was in college, I went to ASU, and at ASU, Arizona State University, I had a non-Mormon friend, and I was Mormon at the time, and I was kind of like, I was trying to like interact with him more as a friend, but like I had the ulterior motive of missionary work, but like he had experience with Mormons before, so I was kind of trying to see what is his perspective on Mormons, kind of feeling him out. And he told a story that was kind of enlightening. He said, you know, growing up, I had some neighbors that were Mormon, and they started out super nice to us. You know, they brought over cookies, they introduced themselves, they were super friendly, super nice. But then one day they brought over a Book of Mormon and invited us to church, and we said no. And ever since then, they disappeared
Dun,
and we
dun,
never
dun.
heard from them again. And it's like, what happened to all this niceness? What about this friendship? It all disappeared, right?
Right.
And so it's almost like we're nice to you because we want to convert you. And if you don't convert, then we're not going to be nice to you, right?
Right.
What was the niceness sincere, or was there an ulterior motive? You know what I mean?
Well, a lot of times people have compared MLMs. I think I've heard the comparison to MLMs and Mormon theology, like it's like a cosmic MLM. But I thought that
Mm-hmm.
was a pretty interesting comparison. Um, but I've actually been in love with the idea of MLMs from a young age, and it's just
Mm-hmm.
always been about like finding the right one. I've been in love with the topic, but anyways, besides the point of that, in
Mm-hmm.
my study and thoughts of them, what I've found is that more often than not, I think the reason why MLMs have become synonymous with a scam in so many people's minds is that exactly what you're talking about. Where and I used to listen to this guy. I don't want to give away which one I was doing as a teenager, but this guy. I won't even say his name, but I would listen to tapes of him, and he had this voice like this, and he would telling you how to be successful. And one of the things that he would say is like, if you have your friends and they don't believe in you, or they don't, you know, they don't, you know, they're tearing you down or whatever, just find new friends. And it was kind of like this. But I actually spotted my brother and I, the same brother that I told you about at the beginning of this conversation. He and I, from very young age, would like actually talk about this and say like, you know, that's really stupid that you would stop like hanging out with someone just because they're not keeping your positive vibe going with your MLM or whatever. But that is you know what some people do if they get too carried away, I guess, with anything. You're talking about it within Mormonism, but like it could be in business, like where you just yeah, it's I guess it's that inauthenticness that you're talking about, where it's to like get something. And I remember when I first got home from my mission, I had a good friend named Jeff that I worked with at the grocery store that I worked with, and Jeff and I loved to talk about movies, and so we were just always talking about movies. But then somehow, in almost every single day conversation that I had with him in movies, I'd somehow find a plug for the church that I could throw in there, and like, oh, did you read that verse that I asked you to read or whatever? I was still on my mission. I was like somehow finding a way to intertwine my friendship around proselytizing. And Jeff just one time said to me, he's like, you know, I was still going by Jonathan at that time. So he's like, you know, John, he's like, I really like talking to you about movies. It's really fun. Like whenever we're talking, I'm just having such a good time. I really like talking to you. But he's just like, you just really need to cool it when it comes to the church thing. And he's just like, you know, it's fine to like, I've enjoyed some of those conversations too. Don't get me wrong. Like they've been very fascinating, and like we've gone into like such deep thoughts and stuff. He's like, I've enjoyed it, but it's like you just really need to learn to cool it. It's like you're gonna have a problem with like building relationships with people if you do this. And it got me thinking. I'm like, oh, I need to be aware of what I'm doing. And so I've tried to, since Jeff taught me, be a little bit different with how I approach and be a little bit more like what we've talked about, kindness, more authentic kindness of just like, you know, getting to know somebody, and those conversations just happen naturally. You don't have to just kind of
Right.
try to force it and wedge it into every little thing.
Right. I think as we will discuss soon, I think kindness solves a lot of the problems of niceness, right? So like the insincerity thing, kindness, like I was telling you, like etymologically, it's related to kindred, which is related to family bonds. And so if you think of kindness like treating someone like family, I think that solves a lot of problems because you're naturally going to be sincere with your family. You know, like most people, they can be direct, they can be honest with family, you know, usually that's who they can be most comfortable with because, you know, family, you know, evolutionarily, it's kind of like we're all on the same team usually, you know, and it's more complicated than that in reality. But there's much more, we're all on the same team within a family than outside of a family, right? Even though there's conflict within a family, there's much more unity inside the family than outside. And so there's a certain amount of, we're all on the same team, let's be sincere with each other and solve these problems together. And so if you're treating them truly as family, then it's like, well, guess what? If they're family, then you're supposed to care about their well-being sincerely. That's like what you're supposed to do in a family. And so that subtracts all the insincerity, or it should.
Right. That's actually what, aside from your and my interactions, that actually is something that made you more approachable to me in the first place. Is I saw also how you dealt with other people. Like you'd have, you know, these online debates. I've told you which one I really liked on that debate that you had that I feel like is just at the heart of everything. But you have these online debates, and then I see you like in the group, you know, defending, you know, standing up for someone that actually, like, at the very core of things disagrees with you, but you're still treating them like family. And so, you know, that's probably was like the beginning of me being like, oh, I feel like I can actually talk to this guy. Is I saw that, you know, coming for you like what's the word, demonstrating isn't the word I was thinking about, but yeah, you were acting out those principles that you're talking about.
Yeah. I think Mormonism probably taught me the philosophy of, you know, being an example or like acting out what you believe. And so if I believe that this is the right way to do things, I should try to act it out.
Right.
But I'm not perfect either. I slip up, but that's the ideal. I try to do that. And so I'm glad it came out at least once or twice for you. But in addition to this, now to be fair to Mormons, I don't think it's like insincerity is not the only explanation, right? So like for the cookies example, like I think often Mormons are just afraid. They don't really understand outsiders. I think there's a lot of fear mongering within Mormonism. I think within the books of scripture, there's a lot of that. This is one of the problems with the religious perspective, is that there's a lot of fear of the outsider. So it's like, oh, like I gave them cookies and they rejected me. It's like once they get rejected, it's like there's like this big cloud of darkness painted over them. It's like, ooh, satanic energy. They rejected the epitome of goodness. Like I can't even comprehend how someone could reject the epitome. Like I'm giving them the divine fruit of the tree of life with all the sincerity of my heart. And I literally can't process this rejection, and I'm afraid of what I can't process. This is satanic, this is spooky, this is darkness, this is scary, and they retreat from what they're afraid of. So there's another possible explanation, which is a different problem. I think this is a problem with kindness, not a problem with niceness, right? So
Yeah.
The niceness problem, I'm not sincere. The kindness problem is I'm sincere, but you're no longer family. You're now Satan, and I'm afraid of you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a great point.
I was sincere when I thought you were family, but now you're looking like a scary outsider, and you're this outgroup now. I don't know how to be sincere with you. I don't know how to be kindred with you because you're something I don't understand. You know what I mean?
That actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So there's the kindred stuff has its own problems, but moving down the list on the kindness problems, We talked about the boundary problems. I think one of the things is Mormonism really teaches you, like, if your bishop tells you you should accept a calling, you should accept it, right? That's a boundary. That's red flags for boundary problems. It's like some people have different life situations. Not everyone can do everything. And there's this idea of bishops are infallible, right? Whatever the bishop gives you comes from God. And so that puts a lot of pressure on people to just abandon their boundaries and just accept, you know, whatever is demanded of them. And that's a testimony breaker for a lot of people. It's like their life starts spiraling out of control. It's like, I thought this was a divine calling, but my life is worse because of it. Like, how do I reconcile following God and my life becoming worse? That's not a good system if you're trying to keep people believing in God. You know what I mean?
So this is probably going to shock you and surprise you when I tell you this, but you're sitting up in your seat. But so I have one of my best friends in the entire world is my nephew through my wife, and about I'd say about like 3 or so years ago, he and I, like, every single night we were reading the scriptures together. And at the time he was very active in his ward. He's out of state, but he's very active in his ward. And at the time I was, as far as the doctrinal side of things, I was the person he was coming to and he was like leaning on for all of his doctrinal questions. And he was about 12 years old or so. And 12, 13 when I had this conversation with him. And I could sense that this could be a topic from another time, but like I know that John Dehlin and Mormon Stories is like really huge on informed consent and stuff. And like, but my I guess biggest argument that's like, there's, if you're opening up Pandora's box, or like you're opening up a tree with all these different branches, like the amount of things that have been said about Mormonism, like where does the informed consent end? Like, do you have to give somebody a PhD when they're 12 or when they're but what I, for better or for worse, like somebody could, look at this, and I mean, this is after he was baptized, because he got baptized when he was 11. So it wasn't like I was necessarily like trying to avoid all of like going into depth of every little thing, to get him baptized or whatever. But I was just seeing that it was like making him not a kid. Like it was like it was like he was had way too much anxiety, and we went and talked through questions, and he like one
was
day
the source? I'm a little lost. What is the source of the anxiety?
So he just at a very young age, this particular nephew, like he thinks like a 20-year-old, but he's only 12. Like he just has these amazing questions, and he just this natural, like, just inborn like anxiety for his soul. And it, like, one day he'd be like, oh, I want to tell everyone about Jesus. I just read the book of John and I just want to tell all my friends, even though like people out over here aren't that religious and I'm going to get made fun of, or I'm just going to do it anyway. And then he'd like get like beat around a little bit and he'd be like, oh, that was so hard. But so one day he'd be like that, and then the next day he'd be just like, wait, but what about this? What about this? What about the second coming that terrifies? But anyways, it just was this up and down constantly, and I could tell it was hurting him. Like, just, as far as like just the constant up and down, I'm like, you need to have fun right now. You're 12. You need to and so I actually said, I think you should just like take a break from like, I didn't tell him to stop going to church or anything, but I'm just like, I think you should just focus on other things in your life right now besides the gospel. Because I think for your own, and he started playing the guitar and he started getting into sports and he stopped going to church as often. And he's still, but anyways, it's kind of like you brought up callings and stuff. So I actually think you should say yes. That's my, I guess, the way that I think about it doctrinally. So I'm very like faithful Mormon in that sense, or LDS in that sense. But at the same time, there is a breaking off point. Like, it's, if men are that they might have joy, and by, the gospel's actually causing you to have mental health issues, then that's a problem. And just like anything in life that's causing mental health issues, maybe you should like breathe for a little bit. So that's what I thought might have surprised you, that I was actually telling my nephew, it's like, let's not read the scriptures anymore together for a long time. let's, let's
Wow.
let's
Wow.
let's like just let you be a kid for a little while. I don't know.
That's fascinating. Yeah. So he was too deep for his own good, too philosophical for his own good, huh?
Well, no, and that's a great thing. And I know we're going to have, like I said, he's one of my best friends. We're going to have deep conversations for our entire life. I just felt like he needed to start having some experiences where that he could just enjoy them for just their own sake and just have some fun.
Yeah, yeah. There's a certain amount of religion brings you into the solemnity of nature, and you can't. It kind of sometimes, for better or for worse, religion brings you into this eternal perspective, and sometimes people sacrifice the joy of the present for the rewards of eternity.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, some part of being a kid is just living in the moment, and religion kind of in some ways goes against that, right?
We of all men are most miserable, as Paul would say.
Yeah, so it's interesting.
If the dead not raised at all, I guess is the context.
But sometimes there's benefits to that, but it's just nuanced. So there's we've already touched on conflict avoidance, right? And the worst part of conflict avoidance is when you hide or cover up problems, right? So sometimes, and religion can do this, there's a mixture of forces, right? So one of the worst possible things religion can do is cover up abuse, right? And so it's like, well, we don't want to have conflict. It's like, oh, there's a molester in the family. And it's like, oh, this is awkward. We don't want conflict. So we're just going to pretend it doesn't happen. And we don't want conflict. So just treat him like normal. And we don't want the church's name, like this person, they have a really high calling. We don't want the church to look bad. We don't want conflict with the church. So we're just going to cover all this up. And that's so bad for protecting children. You know what I mean? And so that's kind of too much niceness can go down a really dark path when it starts covering up problems. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think it would be really naive to say that there's not some of that in the LDS Church, as far as like we want to protect the establishment that we've the established church that we've grown and we've nurtured all this time. And it's not just as the brethren, it's not just me, but like my forebears, like all of these people that came before, like got it to a certain point, and I don't want to be the one that destroy, like there's got to be a lot of pressure there. So I think it'd be naive to not think of it that way. And I think also that like in the specific examples that you're giving, there probably I think it'd probably be almost for sure that we know a lot more of now than we did in times past about what abuse can cause to the victim, and what that means for their entire lives and things like that. Because so I think I don't want to paint this rosy picture that there isn't that like self-preservation as an organization that's part of the dynamic of that. But I think there is a little bit also of the kindness and niceness, maybe to a fault, of like even the perpetrator, that we care about that person's soul. And you should, the person, a lot of times perpetrators were abused when they were young and things like that. So it's tough to say, it's really tough to say with these things, like how things should be handled perfectly, because like a lot of people probably have been blessed as far as like the abuse cycle maybe ended because the church put a lot of care towards both parties, both the victim and the perpetrator, in trying to like let's help heal this, let's help. And so there probably has been abuse cycles that have been ended right then and there because of that love. But at the same time, it makes the victim just feel like, what am I, chopped liver? And so there's a lot to that. And so I just wanted to say that, like, I agree with
Mhm.
much of you said. And I think it's multi-layered.
Right, right. So, like I was saying with the tit for tat thing, the tit for tat is a nuanced strategy. It's got you start off nice, then you get a little bit of revenge, and then you forgive, right? And so sometimes the church can do a similar process. It's like we start out nice, now there's a perpetrator, like we're gonna punish them a little bit, like there's religious punishments, and then once they do the repentance process, then we forgive. But
Okay.
there's a danger to this strategy, which is the kindness kind of solves part of the problem. Is if you think that forgiveness is magical, right? If you think that like the atonement changes who we are, right? There's this magical idea of self transformation where it's like, okay, here's a perpetrator, they do the repentance process, they will never perpetrate again because they're a new person. There's a certain naivete to this perspective that puts perhaps children in danger. It's like if they've done it before, you need you shouldn't jump to the conclusion that they'll never do it again, because the scientific data says that's not how it works. You know what I
Right.
mean? And so if you are being naive and say, oh, they've transformed, we have to forgive them, we can't, that puts the next child in danger. So there's a certain amount of disagreeableness. It's like, hey, we got to treat them differently. We need to establish boundaries. We can't just be super nice. We got to control this situation to protect. And so the kindred thing is we need to think about the well-being of the children, right? If kindred, it's thinking of they're my family. So it's like, well, that I should care about their well-being like my well-being. That's the kindred perspective. So like all kids everywhere, we should care about their well-being equally. Why should we be biased? Let's treat everyone with a kindred spirit and then care about all the well-being. And then we need systems to protect this well-being. You know what I mean? So that's the niceness versus kindred problem, right? If we are too nice, and then we can be naive sometimes, but if we're kindred, we're going to be more vigilant to protect the kids.
Well, this is probably a conversation for another day, but I've been fascinated. It has been fascinating to me when I've looked into history and looked at like different flowcharts of philosophers that are influenced by other philosophers and things like that. What I've noticed is there tends to be branches of philosophers that that seem really like over exaggerated in what's like thought of as like the masculine virtues, like bravery, conquest, things like that. And then other philosophers are like very over exaggerated in like the feminine virtues of like, individuality and caring what I've thought was fascinating is when I look at like St. Thomas Aquinas and like Christianity and like some of the philosophers that have come from that, it seems like kind of a balance between the two in a way. Maybe that's the Old Testament and the New Testament intermeshing, but you have the reason why I brought that up is I feel like all our culture right now is when it comes to the elites, I feel like it's very masculine. Like, there's messaging that comes through different sources and it's like, hey, we're going to create order and it's kind of like a conquest by media more than by war, although war has a play, but it's in the elites, it's like over exaggerated in the masculines. But as far as the populace, it's actually, and a lot of the messaging that comes to the populace, it's actually like putting like niceness, kind of like you had when you were a kid. Like niceness is like the ultimate virtue, and it kind of makes us like more conquerable in a way. But I was just in just thinking of like these things at a macro level, it's made me like kind of yearn for like different times where like even on a small level, like in towns and stuff, it's like, hey, I'm going to stand up for your honor and challenge this guy to a duel, or like I'm going to it's like if somebody, like some of these things that you're talking about, like if you're talking about sexual abuse and other things like that, it's very, very, very damaging. And it's like a lifetime and then multiple lifetimes, the ripples effects, and it's and so like, you know, it actually is good. I'm not an expert on any of this stuff, on like theories on like what laws should be with things like that, but I imagine it's actually good for a perpetrator to be held to justice in certain things and not have it swept under the rug, because it's like you're able to like see the full, you're able to be taught a little bit more the full effects of what you've done, because if the punishment matches the crime, heaven forbid, when it comes to some of these things, the punishment matches the crime, because it does cause so much. But like, then even just through the punishment, you're like, oh wow, what I did must have been really big because the punishment was really big. But I do feel like not just in the church, but I think society in general, there's, like I said, this is a topic for another time probably, but there's so much abuse going on, and so little being done about it, I guess.
Yeah, I'm totally, yeah, I agree that like in general, this is not necessarily a criticism of Mormonism. It's a criticism of niceness, right? There's certain times where it's wrong to be nice. You know, there's a quote. There's a quote that says, "Mercy to the guilty is cruelty to the innocent." There's a scripture in Proverbs. It says, "He that justifieth the wicked and he that condemneth the just, both are an abomination to the Lord." So you have to treat the situation properly. And we have to treat it properly no matter where the abuse is, in churches, outside of churches. So, but we need to take it seriously, which is what niceness struggles with. The disagreeableness is better at, setting up boundaries and kicking butt and taking names. You know what I mean?
I don't know if this is the time or place to do this, but I just thought it, so I try to just say once I thought it. But I've had struggles in my own life with pornography, and one of the things that when I've opened up to that on some Facebook groups, like that I've struggled with this at times, is that people tend to say to me that shame is like the worst thing. Like, whatever you do, don't feel shame and stuff. But I'm like, but what if an action that I take is something I should be ashamed of taking because it's not a good action? Specifically, like just with what's out there in the world. And this is part of what I was alluding to, is that so much is being done and not much is being done about it. There's just so much out there that's just really demeaning and terrible. And if I ever like click on something that's demeaning and terrible, I should feel ashamed of myself. And what my argument in some of those groups, when they say like, oh, don't feel shame, is that like, if it's something that I should feel ashamed of doing and I do it anyway, I should feel a little bit of level of shame of like in doing that, because it actually, to me, it actually speaks to like how much I do have a sense of self-worth, because it's like, okay, this isn't something that's me. This isn't something, my worth is greater than, doing these shameful things. And so I know that I'm not an expert in the fields of like a lot of these people that are counselors and deal with shame and stuff. And so I don't think they're wrong. I just think that it could, like, it's probably more of, it might be more of semantics as well. But I think that to some level, you should at least know certain things are wrong to do, and say that was a wrong thing that was done, even not from a religious perspective, but there should at least be a recognition that this was a wrong thing. Not necessarily that you are just a shameful person that, like, I think once it becomes to the point where you're just, I'm a terrible person, then yes, I agree. But that you should at least say, like, that thing wasn't me. I should be ashamed of that action in a way, even though that's a word that people hate. But
Yeah, this is kind of a separate topic, but it's a very valuable topic. Um, I largely agree with you, um, but I think Mormonism just takes it too far. I think that's the main. So it's like that's the Aristotelian perspective. There's a sweet spot of the right amount of shame. Then there's the possibility for too much shame and too little shame. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, whenever there's a bipolar perspective of, oh, you should be extremely ashamed, or oh, you should have zero shame. Yeah, those are probably they're probably missing something when you're seeing a bipolar paradigm.
And I
You know what I
don't
mean?
think it's completely off topic. I think it's just expanding it to more of society in general, because I think that we're too nice in, let's say we're just too nice in society. Like, yes, you shouldn't be using like calling out individuals and just like calling them terrible names that are in that industry or things like that. Like that doesn't do any good. Like, but at the same time, I think in a way we're way too nice to, as a society, to just this anything goes type thing. There should be a point where as a society we say, hey, at a certain point that's really offensive, and so that, like, it is probably a topic a much bigger topic for another time, but I think it is connected, because I think that you can be too I think the point is that kindness or kindredness is that you're not afraid to stand up for what you believe in a way. You're willing to do that.
So there's so this is you're trying to lasso me down a bunch of tangents. How dare you? No, I'm just kidding. Because shame is a complicated topic because it's like, well, what's the difference between guilt and shame? Are we talking about social shame and internal guilt? Or yeah, so maybe social shame, maybe there's a different paradigm around social shame versus internal guilt. Right? You know what I mean? Maybe it's wrong to just go shaming people. And then there's another point, which is, well, free will. How does free will factor into it? If you have control over it, maybe you should have guilt. But if you don't have control, should you have guilt over something you can't control? So that's a free will question. Those are a bunch of tangents. We're not going there. I know you want to go there. We're not going. I,
Hey, you, you
I,
you always want to go to the free will question. I know you.
I am disagreeable enough to stick to topic. um, but so here's another problem with niceness, which is conformity. And now, as everything, trying to have a nuanced perspective, sometimes there's a benefit to conformity, which gives you unity and cooperation and social cohesion and harmony. Those are all beautiful things. But there's a negative to conformity, which is manipulating people into cookie cutter robots. All of your individuality needs to be suppressed, and everyone needs to conform into this Mormon paradigm of white shirts, ties, cookie cutter. Okay, I say all the nice words, and I never say the bad words, and I never question authority,
Shit.
and I never say the bad words, and
Sorry.
I never question Joseph Smith, and I never question the prophets, and I'm always speaking within a very narrow Overton window, never getting into this forbidden territory of linguistic, danger. And so there's too much conformity versus a sweet spot of conformity. And too much niceness, you're just agreeing with the culture. It's like, okay, we just follow all these cultural rules and we never question them. You know what I mean?
Right. And so it's a I guess parallel topic, the conformity versus non-conformity to this niceness one we're talking about.
Right. Like, do you think that niceness brings too much conformity sometimes? Too much niceness brings too much conformity?
So we're talking about kindness solving a lot of the problems that comes with too much niceness. So if you're kind, then usually that means that there's a relationship there somewhere, and that usually involves listening, which if there's listening and there's a relationship, that usually would mean that there's also thinking going on, and where there's thinking going on, then there is going to be more independence. So I think it. I don't know if I'm answering that question that you just asked, but I think that all of these things are related. Like when you're, I think that kindness and kindredness naturally will make you think about things more, be a little bit more nuanced with how you think about things, which will automatically lead to free will. No, just kidding. And independence.
You wish. No, so do I guess simple. The simple question is, does too much niceness bring too much conformity? And then the follow-up question is, does kindness solve that problem, if that problem exists?
I think yes and yes. I was
Yes
long-winded
yes.
with the first time I answered it, so I'm just going to say yes and yes this time.
So kindness solves the conformity problem. Yeah, I think when you're treating people like family, you're allowing them to be an individual. It's like, oh, I accept that my brother is different from me, and that's kind of how he is, and we just work with it. And so in a kindred setting, you would allow the individuality and the diversity without being too oppressive. So that seems to make some sense.
And just one sidebar with that, not to do a different tangent, but just one sidebar is that so the kindredness I think does need to have openness with it as well. So like if that you can have a friendship with someone that disagrees with you on almost everything, but I think for it to be a true friendship, you have to know where those disagreements are. And it doesn't mean you stop being friends, but if you're I guess that there's on a more cultural level where like not just within the church or not just within religions, I feel like culturally we're told to just be like nice at all costs and walk on eggshells so that we won't offend, or but I think it's refreshing to people when somebody is able to express to them their opinion on something, even if it's even if it's on some sensitive topics, as long as it doesn't mean, oh, me telling you this is me explaining why we can't be friends. It's no, like we definitely are friends, but you should know this about me. That's the end of my sidebar, but I wanted to emphasize that point, that I think kindness needs to have that openness as well.
Right. So we kind of talked about this point already. Sometimes niceness can create, it makes you repress your emotions. I think I noticed this in myself on my mission. I actually pissed off one of my companions. I served my mission in Taiwan, and I had a companion who was Taiwanese, and I think he was a convert. And so like in my 20 years of taking Mormonism extremely seriously, my method of being a good Mormon was to try to suppress all my negative emotion. And as a missionary, I felt like I was at a point where I had almost successfully just suppressed all my negative emotion. Like there's church teaches you, oh, just smile. If you fake it till you make it, you keep smiling, eventually you'll feel happy despite the negative situation. And so you're just like creating artificial happiness all the time. And so all day on my mission, I'm getting rejected nonstop. It's humiliating. It's difficult. And I'm just smiling my way through it, just creating artificial happiness despite all of the sadness, you know what I mean? And it was, for some reason, it was pissing off my companion. He was like, Seth, a normal human is supposed to be upset right now, but you're smiling. You're not even a normal human. You're a freaking robot. And I'm like smiling as I'm getting insulted. Isn't that a funny comment? That's so interesting that he thinks I'm an abnormal robot of a human. So interesting. But it started getting the wheels turning. I'm like, maybe there's a reason for negative emotion. And maybe by just suppressing it all the time, oh, I'm just being a smiley, nice Mormon, maybe I'm missing something, and he thinks I'm missing something important, and I don't really understand what I'm missing, but maybe I need to think more about that. You know what I mean?
Did it ever did you ever have a point while you were out there that just a lot of just suppressed negative emotion just hit you all at once, and like you're like, whoa, and kind
No,
of got almost buried by it? No, you were a
no.
robot the whole time.
I was a robot the whole time. Well, never mind. I had a little bit of tit for tat with. I had only one bad companion. I was blessed with a lot of really high quality companions, but I had one companion that was a problem, and I was nice to him for one transfer, and I was just praying, get rid of him. I don't want to deal with him for a second transfer. Like, I'll deal with all his, I'll be nice. I'll be nice with all his crap for one transfer, which is a month and a half. So I'll do everything his way for a month and a half, but I'm not doing it his way for more than a month and a half. So if you force me to be his partner for more than a month and a half, there's going to be problems. There's going to be inter-companionship conflict because I'm not being Mr. Nice Guy for longer than a month and a half.
That's pretty impressive. That's pretty impressive that you did that for the full 2 years. Like you didn't even sounds like, even like the feeling of homesickness, you're just like you just brush it off your shoulder. That's a negative emotion, so you can't feel homesick. You have to I know that I don't know if this happened to you even in the midst of your robotic experience, but for me, I did have a point when I was in Jamaica where, and I think it was at about 6 or 7 months, where I just something changed and clicked in my brain where I was just like, whoa, this is really, really cool to be in a different culture and to be in a different place, and kind of the sense of adventure kicked in, because the first 6 months were very robotic to me because it was so just overwhelming, just everything that I was supposed to do and learn so fast. But there was a certain point in time where I'm just like, wow, this is pretty cool to like be on this adventure. Did you have that at all in Taiwan, where you're just like, this is an adventure?
I mean, I wasn't a robot,
Charlie.
I wasn't a robot. So like, one interpretation of robot is zero emotion. Right. I wasn't that. I was just 100% positive emotion.
Right.
So like, I had the sense of adventure. I was like, wow, Taiwan, so exciting. Chinese, right. Ooh, new food, ooh, you know what I mean? So I had a certain childlike positive affect, but I had suppressed the other half of my humanity. So I was like only half a human instead of a full human, you know what I mean?
Right. So you probably had that almost from the beginning, where maybe because I had a lot of negative feelings at the beginning, then that's when my sense of adventure broke out about 7 months in. But you probably had that just excited right. sense of adventure from the beginning on yours. But
yeah. And like I guess Mormonism probably taught me ways to twist negativity into positivity. So there would be times that were just very negative, but I had mental mechanisms of kind of shifting it into a positive, you know what I mean? So, but where was I going with all that? Niceness suppresses your emotions, so maybe that's unhealthy. So like, maybe, I guess the moral of that is maybe think about that. Like, maybe it's good to like, maybe some of that is good, but maybe too much of it is bad. And maybe think about, when is negative emotions good? If you struggle with a lack of negative emotion, you should think about reintroducing negative emotion. But most people don't struggle with that, so it's probably a non-issue for most people.
It is a natural human emotion, though. That's the important part, is to realize that sadness, frustration, all of these things, you can be feeling them and being like, this is good thing to feel all of these things. And I think it's normal for all of us to feel them, but like, I think it is also normal for people to think, oh, there's something wrong here, which there isn't necessarily something wrong when you're feeling those.
There was a really beautiful quote recently. I have to find this. There's a quote that actually addresses this. That let me search my Facebook page real quick. Or I can introduce the next topic, which is obsequiousness. So in the book of Job, Job is obsequious, And obsequious is the idea of being like a slave. So it's being like it's like not standing up for yourself to a fault. You know, in the Book of Mormon it says, "Oh, we are sinners, we are nothing, we are like the dust of the earth. We're just like worthless." You know what I mean? And so the obsequious perspective is like, so like one slave and a master, it's like, "Oh, I'm a worthless slave and you're an amazing master and I should just do whatever you say." And if you put that in a religious context, it's Job and God, where God is just like beating the crap out of Job's life. And Job is like, "Yes, God, I love you no matter how much you hurt me. You're amazing and I'm worthless." You know what I mean? And I think, what do you think? Is there a is there a connection between niceness and being obsequious?
So is obsequious another way of saying, what's the word that they always used to use in medieval times in Christianity? I'm trying to think of the word that there was a word that they used back then that put a high value on, like Joan of Arc would use this word. I'm trying to think of it, but is it basically like reverence, or like is obsequious kind of like a reverence for? Is that a good synonym?
Well, obsequious
Surrender to.
It's the vice version of reverence. So if you take reverence and you make it a bad thing, that's obsequiousness.
Okay. So is obsequiousness and niceness, is there a connection there? Is that what your question was?
Yeah, my question is so obsequiousness is too much reverence, and so the question is too much niceness connected to too much reverence?
So it's interesting because there is those verses that you're talking about, like even Moses in the book of Moses and Pearl of Great Price says, like, here am I, like, understanding that man is nothing, which thing I never had supposed before. And there are different verses like that in scriptures, but I feel like, especially with the restored gospel, which is what is something that there's also these metaphors of becoming a king or a queen and becoming, and thinking of yourself as a child of God, that like you're a child, so God is a father figure that's trying to help you learn the things that bring God joy, and so there's this on the one hand this nothingness, but on this other hand that, wow, there's somebody out there, this benevolent God out there that I'm created in God's image, and there's this benevolent being out there that I mean everything to this being. Like I'm the work and the glory. So I think if you just think about one, maybe that is a little bit. I'm trying to think, is that related to niceness, to over focus on the one side of the coin, instead of thinking? But I feel like in some ways there is this just with life in general, and I like there's people that get into like simulation theory, and like they're trying to like make sense of like, what is this thing that we're experiencing? But I think there's the Rocky Balboa metaphor is a good metaphor for life, where it's like, you get out there and you try, and then you get punched in the face a few times, then you're on the sideline and your trainer's just like, okay, now go back out there, do it again. And in some ways you feel like that's almost like God is saying like that, like just go out there and get beat up again. And it's like, oh, when is enough and when is this just like abuse of me and stuff? And so like I feel like it's healthy to wrestle with these things, and to not just there's a lot there, but I feel like it is healthy to wrestle with. That's an answer to that.
Yeah, that's a really cool thing. That's something that Jordan Peterson said about religion. I think you kind of nailed it there. So like Jordan Peterson, he says there's a difference between ideology and religion, right? And the problem with ideology is overly simplistic, and religion is very complex. And so the key thing to notice is that ideology will just have, it doesn't have enough nuance. So the complexity gives you nuance. So it's like an ideology might say, you are just worthless, and there's no other context, there's no other nuance. Or the ideology could say, you are just great, you are perfect, you are a 10 out of 10, that you are flawless, you are a queen, you are a king, and you don't need to work on yourself, and that's it, there's no nuance, right? That's right. Ideology. And the interesting thing about religion is it comes from a corpus, it comes from a tradition. It's like books upon books. And so like maybe in one part of the book, it says you're worthless, but then in another part of the book, it says you're a pearl of great price. Your worth is unmeasurable. You have infinite worth. And so like it contradicts itself, and at face value, that's confusing, but then you can absorb both of the ideas. And so like in one situation, you need the feeling of worthlessness in order to change and improve. And so you take from the library of religion, you select, this is the lesson I need right now, activate improvement algorithm.
Joseph Smith was a lot like that, where he would say things that you're like, wait, what? Isn't that the opposite of what you just said? It's like, you know, you have to like really focus, like this is the one and only like true doctrine. But then he'd say on the next thing, he'll be like, but you know, we really should be trying to learn from everyone. So it's like, wait, how are those the same? But yeah, it's right. Like, well, it is because it's nuanced. So,
right. So like the atheist types will often say, well, these religious texts, they're so contradictory. It's all nonsense. It can't be true. Like, how can you be worthless and infinite worth at the same time? Discard it, right? But then the Jordan Peterson types will be like, well, it's actually valuable to have both of these perspectives because sometimes you benefit from one perspective, sometimes you benefit from the other, and you can kind of mix and match them according to your needs. And so that's kind of the cool thing. And that's the Aristotelian balancing act, right?
So you do like Jordan Peterson. Are we on record?
I have a nuanced opinion of Jordan Peterson.
I actually do as well.
I don't have too much like for Jordan Peterson, but I don't have too little like for him either.
You're like the Goldilocks zone of Jordan Peterson. It's like just right, just the right amount of
yeah, exactly. So I can criticize him, but I can also say, hey, he brings some interesting things to the table.
Right.
Yeah, but the problem. So one thing is, so here's the thing. I think Mormons are nicer than Christians on average. Build the bell curve. Mormons are more shifted towards niceness on average than Christians. Hot take. That's my perspective. Okay. My hypothesis as to why this is connected to the nature of Scripture. So, in my opinion, the Bible, the Old Testament, it leans heavily on the disagreeable, mean side of things. The Old Testament God, sometimes he's nice, sometimes he's a pain in, he's a jerk a lot of the time. So the Old Testament, it leans, on average, it leans mean. The New Testament, on average, leans nice, right? And so if you take the Bible, if you take the mean part and the nice part, you mix them together, you've got this averaging act. I think you were saying it before, the Bible, it mixes the masculine and feminine energies. So we're mixing the disagreeable and the agreeable. And so if you were to say, I want to create a human that their personality mirrors the averaging of the Bible, they're going to be like half mean and half nice, half agreeable and half disagreeable. And maybe that average is a nice sweet spot, right? So maybe the Bible creates nice sweet spot people. That's an argument. But then Mormonism, it changes the scriptural landscape. So the Bible is just one of the standard works. Now you've got to bring the Book of Mormon in, you got to bring the Pearl of Great Price in, you got to bring the Doctrine and Covenants in. And so if we were to compare the Mormon books of scripture against the Old Testament, I would say all of the Mormon scripture is more nice than the Old Testament. Is that fair?
So I am going to push back on this because
Oh,
I
interesting.
had a
Just he's being disagreeable right now. I like it.
so when I was a Schwann's driver for about 4 years, I had a teacher, a former English teacher from Snow College that was one of my customers, and he said, at the time, he's like, I'm definitely leaning towards agnostic type atheist. Like I'm leaning more towards that side of things, more than believing in God, or especially more than joining any religion. He's like, but if anybody ever is able to synthesize the Old and New Testament gods for me to where it actually makes sense, then I will I will listen to what you have to say. So that got me really, really thinking when he issued that challenge, and my mind's just been kind of working on that ever since. And one thing that is yes, when it comes to things like physical violence, the New Testament is nicer. Like, instead of eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, how about turn the other cheek and things like that. And so when it comes to like things happening on this planet, the New Testament is very, very nice. But remember, most of the scriptures on hell come from the New Testament, not the Old Testament. And so it's kind of like, be nice to people or else. and the idea of hell or eternal punishment is a lot, in some ways is a lot worse than death when you contemplate it. And so the idea that just the New Testament or the Book of Mormon or the Doctrine and Covenants or the Pearl of Great Price is just like that much nicer than the Old Testament, I don't think is true. It's
Really?
like it's like having to have Lazarus dip his finger in water to cool your tongue doesn't sound too nice to me, So it's like yes, when it comes to just like how we're treating people on this planet, yes, I would agree. But like when it comes to like the idea of what God's going to do with our souls, I wouldn't say jump to all of a sudden the New Testament is like the most nice book in the world.
Yeah, that's a good distinction. But yeah, when we're talking about like Mormons, their behaviors like in society,
I can
like,
agree with that. I can be agreeable on that.
The stereotype is Mormons, their behavior is nicer. And so the hypothesis is the behavior injunctions, right? Like hell, it's like, I mean, it's almost like, yeah, the question is the Bible saying be mean or hell? Or is the Bible saying be nice or hell? You know what I mean? And so the question is, what are the behavioral injunctions? The hell part is like motivation for the behavior. The question is, which behavior does it want you to do?
Right.
So
right.
the Old Testament has a bias to, be mean. The New Testament says be nice or hell. And so the Book of Mormon, it's I think the Book of Mormon is less nice than the New Testament, but more nice than the Old Testament. You know what I mean? But I think that the averaging, if you take the Book of Mormon as like, okay, let's say New Testament is 100% nice, the Old Testament is 100% mean, so these are complete opposites. But then the Book of Mormon is like 70% nice, and the Doctrine and Covenants is like, I don't know, 80% nice, and the Pearl of Great Price is like 100% nice. So like the average Book of Mormon, like the scriptures, the Mormon scripture, it's skewing everything towards niceness.
Even when you cut off people's arms, it's just to do missionary work.
Yeah, that they got knocked down 30% for it was a little bit rough there. They got knocked a couple points.
You're still being nice, though.
So that's my hypothesis, is that the scriptural biases, and like Mormons, they read the Book of Mormon more than the Bible, or like it skews their attention away from the Old Testament, which skews their niceness towards Book of Mormon level. You know what I mean?
Well, it's what I love about you, Seth, is that even though like you have you have different things, and a lot of them for good reason, to be like angry at the church organization on different levels. I love it how like you can still like that was a great hypothesis. Like I think that it was like you're very clearly like just thinking about it from a logical perspective, not from a perspective of like trying to find out what's wrong with our scriptures or things. You're just like looking at it very logical. So I had to push back a little bit on like the God of the New Testament being nicer than the God of the Old Testament. But when it comes to practical application, I can agree as far as like
Yeah.
how it affects how we treat each other. I can agree with that.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's very useful to try to measure things, right? So like, I think the future. So like, how do I put this? Objectivity, like so, the postmodern problem, right? We're getting on a tangent here. So it's like our culture. We're entering the space where it's like truth is harder and harder to verify, and with AI, it's only going to get worse. And so if truth is hard to verify, we need like an iron rod of epistemology to hold to. And I think measurement is the iron rod, right? We need to learn how to measure things. And so like what I'm talking about, the niceness or meanness of the Bible, I think you can measure it. You can do a textual analysis. You can run a software program and say, here's a thesaurus, and there are 200 words that are all nice words. This word has 10 nice points. This word has 1 nice point. This word has 5 nice points. And we're going to scan the Bible and we're going to calculate all the nice points. And we can say, oh, the book of Isaiah, 60 nice points. The book of John, 1,000 nice points. And then we can like measure, do averages and statistical operations. We can measure the niceness of each book. We can average out the niceness of big sections like New Testament, Old Testament. And then we can do it for the Quran. Well, how nice is the Quran? And I think this is the future of like figuring out the truth, is like figuring out how to measure all these things, right?
I think along with that, we better at least once every 10 years just like try to find our Mount Sinai to just get away from all words and all analysis and just like it's like interesting what you're saying and scary at the same time. It's like, you know, there can be almost knowing too much. We sometimes just need to get away.
Well, I am not afraid of knowledge. If that's, I know that the Bible has a bias to be afraid of the knowledge of good and evil. Too much knowledge, we're gonna be like the gods.
Or opposite, if you're Gnostic, where it's like, ooh, I'm the one. I'm of the small group that has the knowledge.
Yeah.
Two extremes, but yeah, that's I haven't wrapped my head around the AI thing yet.
Yeah, that's fine. It's a big hot topic. So I found the quote I was looking for. We can jump to that real quick. Window, share window. Oh, where'd it go? The heck? It disappeared. Oh, man. Present, share screen, window. It's not even there. Okay.
Do we have time for a Peter Singer this time, or that for another day?
Well, I can go long. I can go as long as you can go, probably.
I can go longer. I didn't know if there was like a set length that you like to keep these things.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty flexible. Can you see this quote right now?
Yes.
So this is Thomas Aquinas. It says, "He who is not angry when there is just cause for anger is immoral." Why? Because anger looks to the good of justice. If you can live amidst injustice without anger, you are immoral as well as unjust. Those are some feisty words from Aquinas. Do you want to reread that and tell us your thoughts on that?
He who's not angry when there's just cause for anger is immoral. So, yes, that, you know, when you read it, I don't know how you could read it and disagree. You could disagree with, like, you could go into full Plato mode and say, what is just? I think that's the whole Plato's Republic, is trying to answer that question.
Mhm.
But once you've come to that definition, as an individual, as a community, however far you want to go up, that you've all decided, okay, this is unjust,
Mhm.
then I think that would be the only argument you can actually have with that statement. If everyone agrees that this thing is unjust, then I don't think you could disagree with him saying that to not be angry is immoral.
Yeah. So the tricky part of this is the Mormon perspective. In the Book of Mormon, it goes hardcore anti-anger, right? Contention is of the devil. So I think that is part of the priming, like part of the Book of Mormon magnetism towards niceness is, hey, no contention. You know what I mean?
And sometimes, as a Mormon, I think we might confuse that might be another example of confusing negative emotions as always being bad. It's like, wow, this is
Mhm.
uncomfortable right now. That must mean that the spirit left. That must mean that it's really, really bad.
Mm,
Um,
exactly.
and so it's interesting. Somebody once asked my wife and I, like, how do you guys just always seem like, how do you guys keep the fire going in your marriage? And my answer was, we fight. But
Nice.
but it's like but then they're also, I think marriage is the best example that I've experienced in life of this, where there is a point where the fighting becomes very personal and very like cutting. And at that point, and maybe that was what the Savior was talking about, when he was talking about contention being of the devil, because at that point there's really nothing that's ever good has happened to our relationship if that phase of an argument extended. However, like the initial, like, hey, where are we going to put the drapes? Like, where is the couch going to go in this room? Like, I feel like we almost every single thing we ever do, we argue about it. And it seems like at the end of the argument, the synthesis of how the room ends up or how our life ends up always ends up better than if one person would have just gotten their way the first time. Two
Mhm.
minds better than one type thing. And so, one good cool thing about contention, if we want to phrase it that, is that you're able to not lose your individuality in the midst of a relationship. You're able to like, still feel like you have a sense of self. Too many relationships, I think, will, in trying to avoid contention, maybe it's just always the one person that's yielding, and they could lose a sense of self in
Mhm.
that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good for two people to really stand up for what they're thinking and try to resolve it without just. That's part of the problem of agreeableness is they just let they suppress the content, they suppress the anger, they let it build up, and then they blow up at a point which is less healthy than trying to solve it. Right.
Right.
I'm gonna need like a minute intermission, a minute or two intermission. So you can do what you want for the next minute.
Okay.
Oop, let's mute this. Yeah, I am officially back in business. But I'm going to take another drink of water.
Ta-da! Just like magic.
All right. So
These conversations make you thirsty, don't they? It's my second water
they
bottle.
do. Yeah, I go through the water when I'm talking. So do we want to get into kindness? There's a lot to say on kindness.
Sure.
Or do we want to move into the final stuff? It's always hard balancing time with these things.
Well,
It's
I think you've given the kindness more thought than me. So maybe if you could summarize just your thoughts that you've been having on kindness, and I can give you any feedback, if any, that I have before we do the final.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So I'll try to run through some of these. So kindness, it's related to the word kindred, treating others like family. The interesting thing about religion is that in my opinion, they are linguistically hacking into the concept of being kindred, right? So in church, people often address each other as brother or sister. And so it's kind of like social programming. It's like, hey, we are operating like a family. Like even if we're not genetically related, our brains are telling each other, let's enter into family mode, right? And so that's an evolutionary strategy for expanding our cooperation, right? So often the evolutionary perspective is if your genes are similar, then you cooperate because you're trying. So genes are very selfish, right? The selfish gene, the gene wants to preserve its own existence, and so by by families cooperating, they help each other survive. The genes survive. In a tribe, everyone loosely shares the same genes, so the tribe works together. They help each other, and the genes survive. So this concept of a big family is a human invention for expanding cooperation to bigger and bigger circles. And so religion is hacking into this concept of family to expand the evolutionary strategy even further, to expand it to non-genetic people. So like you can go, if you're a Mormon, you can go all the way across the world. You can go to church in Hungary and you can feel like they are family, right? You call them brother and sister in a different country, and you have the same values, you have the same temperament, you have the same culture, and you have the same trust in each other, and it feels like family, right? So you're hacking into that family strategy. And from a scientific, neuroscientific perspective, oxytocin is the chemical for family bonds, right? So this is super important, super interesting. This is the mother bear chemical. So a lot of people probably know that like the last place you want to be is in between a mother bear and her cubs, right? Because the oxytocin is what makes her love her cubs. And when you are between her and her cubs, you are a threat, right? She views you as a threat to the cubs. And so she turns into like super angry mama bear mode, and she will rip you to shreds because you are a threat to what she loves, right? And so that's the interesting thing about oxytocin is the more oxytocin you have, the more love you have, but the more love you have, the more hate you have. It's kind of contradictory, but like you love your in-group, but you hate your out-group, right? So it's a chemical of tribalism. So when the mama bear is willing to kill a human to protect her cubs, she's just killing out of love. But she's like full on activating all of that. She's flipped the coin of love into hatred, right? And so that's the danger of oxytocin. That's the danger of tribalism. That's the danger of religion, right? So religion is hacking into that tribal chemical and saying, hey, we're all the same family. I got oxytocin for you. I got oxytocin for all of you. But everyone outside of this religion, you could become an enemy on the flip of a coin, You know what I mean? That's when like the Crusades, religious genocide, that's when the human nature can become weaponized, right? It's not religion's fault. Religion is just hacking into our normal nature, which is to become violent against the outgroup if necessary. You know what I mean?
Right. And this is probably a topic for another time too. But, my entire life, I felt like the outgroup that the world like is deciding that eventually it needs to get rid of, because the way that I view things, because of my religion, and also because of my conservative upbringing, and just certain ways that I take things where I, put them into the category of scientism, where other people will say science. It'll be like, oh, Winston is one of those people that's going to make our earth burn up in 50 years with like a fiery, burning, because of the way he thinks about the world. So we need to make sure that as a world, we make people that think like Winston extinct. And so I've kind of felt like the out group, from the elites, from like there's certain types of individuality that we need to snuff out in communities, things like that. So
Yeah,
not,
100%.
in some ways, I feel like the doomsday of climate change and things like that has become very religion like in that way, in the way that you're describing it.
Yes, and I 100% grant that, and I will give you even more. I would say that, like I said before, the ideology versus religion perspective, ideologies are more likely to become genocidal than religions, because religions, they contradict. It's like, well, sometimes we genocide the Ammonites, but sometimes we're nice to our neighbor. Sometimes we turn the other cheek. So religion balances itself out with self-contradiction, whereas ideology, it doesn't have enough nuance. And so it's just like, oh, you're in favor of climate change? Well, you're a danger to the future of humanity. You're an existential threat. You know what I mean? There's less nuance built into ideology. So I agree. Ideology can hack into the human nature and create those dangerous propensities better than religion can.
Yeah, it did say in the Old Testament that God was displeased with Reuben and Simeon when they circumcised an entire population just so they could wipe them out while they were recovering from surgery. It did say he was displeased. Maybe, maybe some people would be like, are you sure you're not going to use some stronger words there, God? But but I can't remember exactly what it says, but yeah, it does say like it does at least say like, hey, that wasn't cool, guys.
Right.
Of doing that to the out group, that yes, they are the out group, but you can't just go do that.
Right. But sometimes God is in favor of abusing the out group, but sometimes he's not. So it kind of, the reader is kind of like, it creates this cognitive dissonance where it's like, well, which one does God want? So it makes you think a little bit more instead of just jumping to the genocide or abuse conclusion.
Right.
So maybe a little bit of gray area is healthy to make you question and ponder. You know what I mean?
Right. That makes sense.
All right. So Peter Singer's expanding circle. I think that this is the best way to think about the kindred strategy. So the idea behind Peter Singer's circle is that this kindred strategy expands, right? The expanding circle. So the most fundamental moral perspective is, I care about my own well-being, right? So if all you care about is yourself, you have a very small circle of moral consideration, right? So if you care about just yourself, then it's like, okay, I'm a lion. All I care about is myself. And so I have to go eat something, and it's morally good that I go kill this antelope. And it's morally bad for me to starve. Very simple, very narrow scope of morality. And then you get maybe chimpanzees, and they expand their scope to like, well, you can expand to a family where it's like, okay, I gotta nurse my child, and so I care about the well-being of my child, so I'm gonna nurse them. So I've expanded not just myself, also an infant. And then you expand it to a family unit. It's like, okay, we all work together. We all harvest berries together. We groom each other. You know, I'm going to pick the parasites off of your back and you pick the parasites off of my back, and we help each other survive. And so your well-being is important and my well-being is important. And so we've got this expanding circle of kindred moral consideration where it's good for me to care about you. And then like humans, we just kind of like blow that circle wide open. Like we evolved the ability to do language, we evolved the ability to do culture, we evolved the ability to do religion, and like suddenly we're cooperating with millions of people. And so our scope of morality is becoming more and more universal. Maybe it's like, well, like I care about my state. It's like maybe if you go back 5,000 years, I'm a Greek in a Peloponnesian War. And it's like, I care about my nation, and screw you guys, we're going to torture and enslave you. Like, our morality, it doesn't apply to you, it only applies to us. So you still have a narrow circle of just your nation, and screw everyone outside your nation. But then it seems like religion is trying to push towards more universality, right? Jesus says, love your neighbor like yourself. Love like, who is my neighbor? Like the person who cares about the Samaritan, right? The Samaritan is a foreigner. So if you can expand your love outside of your nation, then you're fully embodying Christianity, right?
And if you somehow didn't get it the first time with the neighbor metaphor, now I'm just going to say, love your enemy. Then now you're for sure going to get it.
Yeah. And then he went super explicit, love your enemy. And so it's, at least for Christianity, maybe different religions have different perspective or different prescriptions, but Christianity seems to be pushing in this direction of universality, where every human is valuable, right? Even your enemies, even the foreigner, they need to be brought into the scope of morality. And so Peter Singer, he's saying that's the goal. The goal is to expand the circle of morality to be more and more inclusive. Trigger word for the right-wingers. And now, but Peter Singer, he doesn't even stop it at humanity. He says, well, why not animals? Why not all sentient creatures, right? And so that seems like a very interesting, you take the idea of kindred morality, take the idea of kindness, and just keep expanding it. More and more kindness, bigger and bigger circle of kindness. Do you have thoughts on that?
Sure. Just something that came to my mind was I spoke earlier about how, at least with me, I don't want people to just on the outside be nice to me. Like I want, if somebody, I would rather, I'd rather have them be truthful with me and, accepting of me in the way of like, hey, I'm not going to go away. I accept you as a person, but not necessarily accepting in a way that's disingenuous to their beliefs. Like I want people to treat me and talk to me with the way they view the world. So one way that I can like, I guess, hear what you're saying and reconcile it with the conservativeness in me is that, I don't want people to, be choosing this life over the eternities. Like I believe in the eternities, and so to me it would be kind to not pretend that I don't believe in the eternities, just to like basically say there isn't such thing as sin, there isn't such thing as shame, there isn't such thing as a God that will hold us accountable to these things. And so to me, that's the way I would want to be treated. So I feel like that if I'm living the golden rule, I would want others, even as an atheist, I would want you to tell me exactly what you actually think, not just be like, hey, I'm gonna say these things because then I can be Jonathan's friend. So that's I feel like I've been too wordy on that answer.
No, no,
That's my answer to that.
That's a fabulous, fabulous point. I forget, someone made this quote, but it was something like, if you truly believe Christianity, if you truly believe me as an atheist am going to hell, I'm offended if you're not trying to save me. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that the mixture between Christianity and being kind, treating people as family, if you truly treat me as example, if you truly treat me as family, then you should care if I'm going to be burning for all eternity, and you should be doing everything within your power to help stop that. You know what I mean?
And really, I've learned that what's in my power is just try to be me and not hide who I am, because then that leaves people with a choice of like, do I want to be more like Jonathan, or do I want to be less like Jonathan? But if I smother you, that's not gonna, that it just doesn't work. So
Yeah. So trying to figure out what strategy works is valuable. But I think you could see from an atheist perspective, it's like it's kind of like an atheist who's surrounded by Christians is like, okay, I want you to be kind to me, in the sense I want you to love me as a human, and I want to love you as a human, as if we're family, because basically we are family. Like, we all come from the same ancestor. Like, even evolution or religion, we're both technically family in both stories. Yeah. So it's like, it seems like a good idea to treat each other like family under both scenarios. And so, but then the question is, well, okay, I want that, but then I don't believe this whole religion stuff. And the problem is that religion stuff is warping the way you treat me. You know what I mean? I don't want you to treat me as family under the context of burning in fire if I don't follow your God's rules. It's like, it makes perfect sense for you to try to police my actions. It's like, I'm trying to save your eternal soul. We need laws for this, and we need laws for that, and we need shame for this, and we need shame for that, because I really care if you're going to burn. It's like, I appreciate the kindness, but I think your method is flawed, because your method is based on a reality that's not true. You know what I mean?
Well, and even if you were to start with the assumption that that reality is true, then what I actually learned in 2020, I made a Facebook post of, these are the things that I learned this year, because you have a lot of time to think in 2020, because there's just all these thoughts going on, and so it's like, oh man, I learned a lot this year. Number one on my list, I think it was number one, but it definitely was the one that I remember the most from my list, was that I'm not the hero of the story, Christ is. So if I'm trying to be the hero of the story, then I will do that. I will try to save people. And people don't like the feeling of, hey, you're being my friend because you're trying to save me. But if I look at Christ as the hero of the story, then that means that it's not necessarily my responsibility to save anyone, which means I'm going to be friends with the people that I like being friends with. Like, you'd much rather have me like hanging out with you because I like hanging out with you than because I have this like motive of like trying to save you. And so I think from either perspective, it's less effective, whether you start at the point of the religion being true, or start at the point of like evolution and secularism being true. Then people like to be liked for with just for themselves, I guess.
That kind of makes me want to bring up a tangent, a related tangent. It's
Sure.
like the whole, in Mormonism, there's the concept of the spirit of the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law, right? And so, like, I forget, someone told me this story. It's their family, one of their family members was not a member of the church, and as a true believing Mormon, they believed that it was wrong to purchase food on Sunday, right? But the best time of the week to visit with their non-member family was Sunday, and the most convenient way to visit was to meet over some food at a restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
And so they had to make a choice between the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. Which is more important, not purchasing things on Sunday or building a relationship with my non-member family? You know what I mean? How do you reconcile those types of conflicts?
Do we have time for a story? I feel
Yeah,
like I'm
man,
talking. I feel like I'm talking too much.
No, I love it.
So I was in Arizona in, I think it was 2011, and I was kind of going through a faith crisis, but it was just more of like just trying to find myself, I think, more than anything. And something about going to church that particular week, and to put it in perspective, when I was living in Arizona with my uncle's family, it was a very I was helping with their family business, but there was no time like for like I was starting to feel like I was losing a sense of self, because we were baking every morning at like 6 a.m., braiding this Swiss bread, and then we were going on bread routes from 3 to 9 every night. And this was like Monday through Saturday. I was helping them with this business, and getting paid was sometimes just kind of like, if we have extra money in the family business, you might get paid. And I promised to stay for a year. And so I was like, okay, I've got to keep my promise. But I was getting so burnt out just as an individual, because it's just so much work. And so then on Sunday, it's like, I've been working all week, and now I'm going to go into this, what felt like, on some of these days, like this artificial environment where there is going to be all this like artificial niceness in some ways. And I'm just like, I just can't handle this right now. I just need time to exist. And so I was sitting, I was in my Sunday clothes, and I walked to the chapel doors, and I was just like, I just can't go in there. I just can't. And then I went to a gas station, and I was just kind of sitting at this gas station on this cement parking, the cement that marks where you park. And I was just sitting there, and this guy, that was he was a Native American, but he wasn't there. There was a reservation really close to Mesa, and he wasn't he didn't live on the reservation. However, you'll find out later that he spent a lot of time there for work. But he said to me, he saw me sitting there. He's like, "Hey man," he was filling up his big truck. He's like, "Hey, you look kind of down. Are you okay?" And I'm just like, "Well, I was about to walk into church, and I just couldn't go in because I was just." He's like, it was really funny. He's like, "Hey, that's the devil. Hop in my truck. Let's go. I'll go back to church with you." And he wasn't a member of the church, so it wasn't like his church. But he's like, "Hey, I'm going to take you back to church." I'm like, "This is an interesting turn. Sure, I'll like trust this stranger and hop in his truck." So we go back, and he sits through sacrament meeting with me, and then I'm like, "Hey, do you want to go to this meeting that's after?" And these other couple is back when it's 3 hours still. And he's like, "Actually, I was planning on going fishing. You want to come?" I'm like, yeah, I do want to come. And so then we went, and we were going to go fishing, but on the way we were driving through the reservation, and there was this this pool of water, and a lot of the people that lived on the reservation were just drinking alcohol and just kind of hanging out in this pool of water. And he's like, "Hey, I want you to see this," or whatever. And I jumped in the water with my Sunday clothes, and it was funny. The natives that were there were like, "Oh, Jack Mormon," and they were just like laughing, and we had a little bit of fun. But he's just like, this is he kind of helped me understand the culture on the reservation. He's like, "This is a real problem. Like, this is like a lot of times like what people are doing all day, because," and there's some things that unintended consequences of welfare and stuff that like have led to certain things. But he's like, I want you to see this," and he was like teaching me about the reservation. And he's like, "Hey, I have a job to do right now." And so it's Sunday, right? So it's the Sabbath. But he's like, "Hey, I have work to do. I have to break this horse. Do you want to come?" And he's like, "We don't have time for fishing anymore because I've got to do this now." I'm like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I do want to come." And so I help him break this horse. And then after he breaks it, then he's going to ride the horse that he broke. And he's like, "Hey, there's this other horse. Do you want to ride it?" And then we rode horses for like 5 hours. Wow. And so anyways, long story short, to completely wrap it up to your question, is that like my uncle he kind of didn't say much when it happened. Like, I just kind of showed him pictures. I'm like, "Hey, I had this amazing day." But then like a few months after the fact, he was upset with me for something that happened in the business. And so he's just like, "Hey, but you need to apologize to my family for breaking the Sabbath." And so I can't remember exactly the way you worded your question, but but anyways, we were just sitting there for a couple of hours where he was like wanting me, and I'm like, even if I do apologize, I'm not going to do it in this moment that you're asking me to, because I actually, that was one of the best days I've had in my entire life. It's one of the most random days, and I'm not going to like say that I'm sorry for it. And so, but remind me of what your question is, because I feel like this story relates a little bit.
Yeah. It was basically, how do you reconcile spirit of the law versus letter of the law? Which one should be prioritized when?
Right. And so I don't know. That's the easiest answer. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I do know that time where I broke the letter of the law a lot that day brought me a lot of joy, and still does, thinking about it. And so if my purpose is to have joy, I think I succeeded that day. I guess that's all I can say.
Nice. Good enough for me. So one thing about kindness is, I think that philosophically, there's a concept of avoiding hypocrisy and avoiding contradictions at the bottom. So here's the thing. The lion, imagine the selfish lion, all he does is care about himself, right? And he abuses all the other lions, and he abuses all the other animals. All he cares about himself. Well, one day he wakes up to his own contradiction. He's like, well, I don't want people to hurt me, so why should I hurt them? You know what I mean? And I think a lot of humanity has woken up to this contradiction. We are smart enough to see our own contradictions. It's like, well, if I was a foreign country, I wouldn't want to be invaded. I wouldn't want to be bombed. I wouldn't want to be colonized. I wouldn't want a foreign culture to be imposed on me and foreign value systems imposed on me, right? So we're starting to see our contradictions. We're saying, hey, treat the foreigner how we want to be treated, you know? And it's kind of an evolving awakening. Like some of the Jesus Christ, he kind of was hinting at it, and he's pushing Christianity that direction. Modern culture, we're starting to see, hey, we should treat other races how we want to be treated. We should treat other orientations how we would want to be treated. Like, we're expanding this lack of if I was homosexual, I wouldn't want people saying all these things. I wouldn't want all this oppression and, you know, all this shame on me. I would want to be treated with respect. You know, it goes both ways. And so it's putting yourself in other people's shoes, and then you just have to keep expanding to more and more shoes. This group's shoes, that group's shoes, this group's shoes, those, and then you just expand it to animals, and then to, you know, aliens. It's an infinitely expanding circle of putting yourself in people's shoes, and there's a contradiction. If I was in their shoes and I don't want it, then I shouldn't be doing it. You know what I mean? That's a contradiction.
Well, the more I've become friends with people who have left the church, the more I've realized that it's a myth. So this is I guess a mic drop here, not this, or like a snip moment. But the more I've noticed that it's a myth that that people leave because they don't have integrity. A lot of times people leave it because they're staying true to their sense of integrity. And so that is one way that I've like put myself in people's shoes that have left the LDS church, is like, actually when I have the conversations with them and when I get to know them, most of the people I've talked to, it's because they were, you know, the way that they looked at truth and the way that they looked at the world, they couldn't stay in the church and have integrity. And so so on a small scale, like a individual level, I've noticed that to your point with putting yourself in other people's shoes. But then this is my one political thing, like really political thing that I might say today, is that I did campaign for Ron Paul. And a lot of people thought his foreign policy was ridiculous, of like, you know, not policing the world. And he was like, you know, people might like us a lot better if we weren't doing this. And so, you know, there's certain aspects of it that I need to do more research and understand better. Like I do have a sense still Part of my faith, I have to admit that like the scriptures that I read and part of my faith have to do with this, that like, you know, America, the way that it happened, that there was, you know, divine help in doing that, even though there's like now with the way historians look at it, then they do look at a lot of like the colonization and all that aspect. So there is some contradictions there, like with how I look at things with that, but at the same time, I guess me just saying that one political thing that I did campaign for Ron Paul kind of shows that like there is a lot of agreement there as well.
Yeah, I think I used to be a Republican, and I was pretty pro Rand Paul, pretty pro Rand Paul back in the day. So I sympathize with that angle of thought. So there's 3 big topics that I kind of want to get to on the topic of kindness, but it's going to kind of push out some of our other topics. So I don't know if you want to butt in with whatever you're prioritizing at the moment, or else I will just go ahead with what I think we should talk about next.
Is that philosophy?
So, so Nietzsche talks about slave morality. I hinted at that a little bit, but we could go into that a little bit more. Hegel talks about master-slave dialectic. And Vinland Saga is a Japanese anime that it contrasts Viking philosophy with Christian philosophy. So I kind of want to touch on that with you.
I hope that I can keep up. Go ahead. I hope that I can keep up. I haven't read a lot of these people, so.
But yeah, there's a lot of other things I want to talk. We might have to talk about this other stuff at another time because it's just too much.
Right.
Like I wanted to get more into the letter of the law versus spirit of the law. Get into deontology versus consequentialism. I wanted to get into the future of Mormonism, impact of science, philosophy, and culture, evolutionary Mormonism, metaphorical Mormonism, deterministic Mormonism, inclusive Mormonism, transhumanistic Mormonism, space Mormons, and then talk about the benefits of philosophy.
We might need to put like a month in between these to allow me to kind of catch up to you with my reading.
Yeah.
Unless you're just wanting the just really raw, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? And hope that I can intellectually keep up. But that's fun too.
Okay, yeah, maybe the Nietzsche, Hegel, and Vinland Saga stuff, I can let you read about it, and we can catch up on that at another time.
Okay.
So, okay, Mormon doctrine versus culture. We talked about the letter of the law versus spirit of the law. There's an interesting scripture that I pulled on this topic. Doctrine and Covenants, section 58, verses 26 to 28. For behold, it is not meet that I should command in all things. For he that is compelled in all things, the same is a slothful and not a wise servant. Wherefore he receiveth no reward. Verily I say, men should be anxiously engaged in a good cause, and should do many things of their own free will, and bring to pass much righteousness. For the power is in them, wherein they are agents unto themselves. And inasmuch as men do good, they shall in no wise lose their reward. How do you interpret that within the letter of the law versus spirit of the law context?
Well, if Jesus is coming anyway in a few years and the world's just going to end and the prophet hasn't said anything about it, like, why should I do anything? Sorry. I heard things like that so many times. I was a very unusual high schooler. So I was actually homeschooled until 9th grade and then started going to high school. But because of that, I had like all these different things like that were important to me that weren't in pop culture. And I swear I probably only heard that like 10 times, but it seems like I heard it 1,000 times. And that was like the most annoying thing anyone could ever say to me.
So that's basically the opposite message, which is do nothing because fate is in God's hands right now.
Yep. Be a slothful servant because,
right.
what can I do anyway? And, God will sort it all out. I like the message of The Chosen. Dallas Jenkins, the director of The Chosen, always says, bring your, it is not our job to feed the 5,000. it is only our job to bring our loaves and fishes. And so I like that as kind of a balance between those two things. Like, yes, God is the hero of the story. Like it was what I discovered I made in 2020, but at the same time, you still got to, bring your loaves and fishes to the table and try to be a force for good in the world.
What is the Book of Mormon quote where it says something like, "We are saved after all that we can, by grace we are saved after all that we can do"? Did I butcher that?
Yeah, one of my seminary teachers did this analogy that, like, if you're crawling across the desert, the glass of water is what's going to save you from thirsting to death, but you still should crawl to the glass of water or something like that. But I don't know. All of metaphors and analogies, it's tough because things are a little bit more complicated than necessarily the metaphor, but they still can be useful. But yeah, that was definitely one of my biggest pet peeves all throughout my life, is when people are just like, oh, it doesn't really matter. Like they especially when people almost there's members of the church that have basically told me I'm on like a road that's like going to go nowhere good by thinking independently. Like I'm going to apostatize the fact that I don't just like hang on every single word from the prophet as if it was from God himself. Like I do believe, this is kind of the paradox of me. Like I can read Ezra Taft Benson, like 15 fundamentals of following the prophet, and be like, oh yeah, great point there, great point there, great point there, great point there. But at the same time, it's more of like, I look at the prophet. This is going to sound really disrespectful, but like there's a character in Harry Potter that, she's like the teacher of the prophecies or whatever. And she gives this prophecy, and then Harry's like, oh, she gave this prophecy to me, and Dumbledore was like, oh, that's the second one she's ever done. All the other ones were like, not real prophecies. But it's like, I kind of look at like prophets as like, they have the calling. Like if something's going to come to the church, God's going to send it through them. So I should hang on their every word when it, like, in that way. But at the same time, there's also like this element of, having enough respect for the mantle. And I have gotten individual testimonies of several of the prophets during my lifetime of like experiencing like, oh wow, they have the mantle. But like there's like this thought of like, they have the mantle, but at the same time they're still not God.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if that makes sense.
You're like baiting out my ex-Mormon vibes right now.
I know.
You're baiting me to do some Mormon debunking right now, but
no, I mean,
maybe
not on this video, but there's definitely time for that eventually, right?
Yeah. Just one quick comment on that is basically, this is my go-to argument against like religious belief. I think selection bias plays a huge role, and most people don't know the extent to which selection bias, most people don't know what it is, nor to what extent it applies in their own life and belief systems. And so like when we're doing science, you're trying to get rid of the selection bias so you can get accurate data. And so what you described there, to me, that sounds like selection bias, right? So selection bias is basically, we're going to ignore all the times that prophecy fails, and we're just going to focus on the times that prophecy works. And like, if you exclude all that negative data, it's like, ooh, prophecy, it's really reliable. But like when you bring in all of that data, so it's like, if you're calculating the reliability of prophecy, you say successful prophecies divided by total prophecies. Simple math, right? So it's like like for Harry Potter, 2 prophecies were successful, 1,000 prophecies total. 2 divided by 1,000, you've got less than a 1% success rate. So not reliable is the correct conclusion from the data. You know
right. So if you're trying to put religion into the scientific method in that way, I could see like, I could be agreeable on that. But at the same time, I don't think it's any different in my own personal life either. Like, because I'm a flawed individual and I'm also not God. And I think I think sometimes we like look at things like us, our spiritual leaders, God. And I just look at it as like humankind, God.
So
Like,
well, that sounds very that sounds very how would you what's the right word? Very that sounds heretical is the tough word is the harsh word
right,
to
right.
use.
So yeah, that's fair. But like what I'm meaning by that is that like in my own personal life, in my own stewardship, you know, I'm gonna have a lot more trial and error than I'm gonna have like direct God voice speaking to me. And I catalog the times in my life where it's like it's a really powerful experience where it's like definitely seems outside of myself and I'm learning something from it. I catalog those moments, but they're the rarity, they're the exception. They're not like, although the one that doesn't seem to be the exception is my experience with the atonement, and we can talk about that another time. But in general, like the downloading to me is a rarity, and it's a little bit suspect when somebody starts talking as if the downloading's happening like nonstop every day to them, because there are people that start saying things like that. But the point is that that's in my personal stewardship for me, my family, my inner circle, the people that I feel like you know, I have you know, a ministry to do, so to speak. But oh, go ahead.
Just to be clear for the audience, when you say downloading, you mean revelatory, hearing the voice of God downloading into your brain, right? Yeah, just I'm not sure if everyone knows that context.
Yeah. So if in my own personal life and in my own stewardship, there's going to be a lot of trial or error, then I feel like no matter high up the scale you go in your stewardship, there's going to be in that. But I don't think that debunks religion, so to speak, because to say that debunks religion on the prophetic scale, that would also debunk religion on my personal scale as well, and I don't accept that.
Yeah, I don't want to, this is a bit of a tangent, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I just had to get a little bit of that out there so people can look up selection bias and see what they think of that pathway themselves. Okay, so I guess the one thing to think about is how do you feel that philosophy has benefited you? Because I know one of our conversations, you really valued Descartes, right? And so I thought that was really cool. And I wanted to see how you bring philosophy and religion together in your life.
Well, I know that as part of growing up and becoming an adult, one of the most interesting things that happens to all of us as we become an adult is one of the most interesting thing that happens to us is a change in the way we view our own parents, for instance. So we, like, as a child, they can't do any wrong, especially if we have like one of our parents that's like, in my case, like my dad is my hero. Like he just can't do any wrong. He's my dad. He just can't do any wrong. And then as you get older and as you part of growing up and becoming an adult, it actually becomes equally as valuable in looking at your parents as like, what are the things that I'm going to do differently? So to connect that to philosophy, what I found a lot of value in is two things. One is me and a friend of mine made up a word because we were like, is there a word that means this? And we're like, I don't sure. Let's just make one up. And it was we called it ancillation.
Oh, wow.
And so what we called ancillation is where you take an unlikely source. Maybe it's a beggar on the street. Maybe it's a philosopher that holds a very different core position than you do. You know, like Karl Marx would be like someone for me, I guess, that holds a very core different position than I do. But you know, you take something that's from an unlikely source and you find something that you can learn from that. Or like, you know, growing up, I wasn't allowed to like watch certain kinds of movies or like, I don't know, but there could be like a movie that, you know, all in all wouldn't be my cup of tea, but I could still learn something really valuable from it. So that's ancillation. And so that I think has been at the times where I have had the time and you know, philosophy is hard. Like when you start reading some of these philosophers, it can get very tedious and hard to like wade through it. But like, you know, it's just like as an adult, when you start to think of your parents, where it's like what I would think differently than them is just as valuable from what I would learn from them. And so there's the two things. There's the ancillation, where you're actually finding things you can agree with or things that you can learn from an unlikely source. But then there's also you looking at philosophers and saying, well, why do I disagree with them? So either way, it makes you think. And so, like with Plato, when I read Plato's Republic, I find myself agreeing with a lot of it. But then at the end of the book, I'm just like, wait, but this is like a totalitarian society. And so like he makes all these great points, but it's totalitarian. So it's just like the exercise of seeing where you find, I guess, similarities and where you find differences is very valuable, I think.
Okay, so we've got about 3 minutes left before we hit the 3-hour mark. So do you want to tell us maybe the top couple of takeaways that you've gotten from your study of philosophy?
And my study just right from the right from the start, it hasn't been a very rigorous one, but it's been a personal journey that has been helpful for me. The reason why Descartes was the reason why I feel like reading Descartes changed my life is because in general with postmodernism, and I haven't made a study of deconstruction and all of the philosophers that use that method, but Descartes' famous for being one of the first, I think. But what I liked about it is I felt like his was deconstruction with a purpose. Like it wasn't just deconstruction for deconstruction's sake. And I'm not saying the others are. I haven't made a deep enough study to know about it. But yeah, I felt like he thought about things a lot like I did. Like he just wanted to. He felt like the college education he was getting at his time wasn't actually helping people learn how to think. And so he was trying to develop a science of what's the philosophical science where you're trying to find out truth. You said it earlier in the
epistemology.
Yeah. So he was one of the fathers of thinking along those lines, epistemology. And then he was also one of the fathers of scientific method. He was one of the first people to be like, oh, the body isn't necessarily sacred in and of itself. It's just a machine. That means we can study it. That means that we can have cadavers. That means we can do all this medical stuff. I think he was just like way cool. So it just learning about him and I still would get creeped out. Like I wouldn't do well with cadavers, but like I wouldn't be one of those. There's like, I guess, body world where people go and see cadavers. I would have a hard time with that. But I think it's cool that he took like everything that he'd been given and was able to like start something completely new, have his own university that was based around all of his own like way of thinking about the world. So just all of that to me was inspirational, and it helped me to like learn how to not just take everything at face value. That's totally. I took almost all of our 3 minutes left.
No, that's fine. Yeah, I totally agree. I like how he was deconstructing with a purpose. He kind of had a goal to reconstruct, right? It's like deconstruct to find the indestructible truths at the bottom. And once you find the indestructible foundation, then you've got something solid to work with, and you can build the foundation upon what is solid. I really like that approach too. I'm kind of, when I try to build philosophic paradigms, I'm trying to be constructive in a similar way, like kind of like deconstruct away all the falsities, find the good true stuff, and build upon that. So yeah, 100% agree.
Ancillation, you're an expert at it.
Yeah, you're gonna have to send me the definition of that so we can put it in the comments. I like it. All right, I think that was good enough to wrap up. Any closing remarks?
Just thank you. Like I said, this was scary for me. And I appreciate the opportunity to grow and to come on here.
Nice. Well, it was a pleasure to have you, and It'll be fun to have you on again. And with that, we are done.